Ultimately, his only true desire was to find a way to be happy. He dreamed of one day falling in love and sharing laughter with close companions. Ultimately, he aimed to lead a perfectly ordinary life as a student. This was precisely what he had always desired. Monday brought a physical beating, Tuesday saw him humiliated with toilet water, and by Wednesday, his private photos had been leaked online. By Thursday, he had begun outlining his plans for a final transition into the metaphysical realm. The day was officially Friday. Falling from such a height would almost certainly prove fatal. There's still a chance for survival if he can land in the bushes, provided he manages to steer his trajectory away from the solid ground. Before he could make a move, a girl appeared and noted that someone else was present. He hadn't expected to encounter anyone else, leaving him completely at a loss for what to do next. Stealing a quick glance at the girl, he noticed she had already turned halfway around. He tried to get her to stay, suspecting she was leaving to call for help. To his surprise, she managed to catch a bird using nothing but her bare hands. She presented the creature to him. She revealed that she was actually a crow, explaining that her body was still lying out on the terrace. Taking the opportunity to speak with him, she asked if he truly desired to be as full of life as the crow. If he truly intended to follow through with his plan, he felt it would be far better to entrust his life to her instead. Confused by the sudden proposal, he struggled to grasp its meaning, while the girl argued that dying would be a tragic waste of the many experiences only the living can enjoy. Infuriated by her remark, he retorted that she knew nothing about him and had no right to decide what was best for his life. Confronted with her presence, he assumed she had only come to mock his misfortune. The girl clarified, however, that her presence on the terrace was for an entirely different reason. In reality, her true goal was to provide the boy's life with a more meaningful sense of purpose. That observation about his life forced him to stop and reconsider his perspective. For instance, she inquired about the thoughts that surfaced when he looked at the crow. She asked if he found the corpse cute, but the boy's expression remained one of pure disgust. He told her that he didn't find the sight beautiful at all, and she admitted that she felt the same way. The body was already lifeless, having deteriorated into nothing more than a foul, decaying heap. At school, he was treated with utter contempt, constantly belittled and viewed as nothing more than human trash. He felt the creature was in a better position than him. It would only become useless after death, while he felt like a piece of garbage even while he was still alive. The girl questioned if that was the reason he sought to end his own existence. Ultimately, this was the exact reason he chose to head up to the terrace that day. Despite the circumstances, she remained there as if to teach him a lesson, leaving the boy to wonder what her true intentions were. Regardless of their conversation, she had no intention of standing in his way. Although she knew nothing about his past, she could tell at a glance that he had led a truly miserable life. Gently rolling him between her fingers, she asked him to provide more details. The idea of remaining worthless for the rest of his life sparked a surge of anger, as a part of him refused to accept that he was destined to be nothing. Deep down, you yearn for a normal life where you can experience friendship and laughter just like everyone else. Although a relationship was out of the question, he still hoped to experience the best moments his youth had to offer. She finally began to grasp the true weight of his emotions. Clutching the railing, she assured him that she could guarantee that kind of life for him. The boy was left in a state of utter shock after hearing those words. She began scaling the railing in an effort to get closer to him. If he hoped to finish his education, he would have to surrender complete control of his life to her. Only by becoming her puppet would he finally be able to find happiness. Since he was eager to find a girlfriend, she decided that if he truly became her puppet, she would be more than willing to help him achieve that goal in any way she could. It was undeniably a favorable deal being presented to him. She questioned whether this outcome was his intention, and though he hesitated, he admitted it wasn't what he had planned. Without warning, the girl reached out and seized him by the knot of his tie. Without hesitation, she leapt from the ledge, signaling that they were starting right then and there. As they plummeted, she proposed a condition. Should they both survive the fall, he would be forced to serve as her puppet. As they plummeted through the air, he struggled to process the reality of their situation while the ground rushed up to meet them. As he plummeted, he found himself reflecting on some of the more painful moments from his past. He faced constant humiliation for the slightest reasons, and he had finally grown tired of being the victim. In the midst of such humiliation, he often questioned why fate had dealt him this hand. Yet his total lack of power left him unable to voice his simmering rage. He could only hope that every one of those people would eventually meet a truly miserable end. After they crashed into the bushes, he was hit with a wave of agonizing pain, realizing he had likely broken his arm during the fall. Next to him, the girl wore a smile as she reflected on everything that had transpired. Fortunately, the drop wasn't severe enough to prove fatal. The girl seized his arms and declared that from that moment forward, he would serve as her puppet. They needed to reach a better understanding of one another. Yet she made sure to remind him once again that he was now her puppet. She began to manipulate the strings that dictated his every move. He would perform his dance for her in this specific manner. To simplify the concept, she suggested he visualize himself as a remote-controlled car. He remained at a loss, unable to understand the reasoning behind her actions. However, from the girl's perspective, the reason was actually quite straightforward. She had grown weary of the life she was living. Ultimately, she decided to shift her focus toward controlling someone else. By doing so, she would ensure that individual lived a truly ideal life. Kneeling before him, she vowed to guide him toward a perfect and happy life, provided he became her puppet. Now, deep in thought, the boy wondered if genuine happiness was possible, deciding he wouldn't mind being a puppet if it meant finding true fulfillment. Ultimately, his only true desire was to find a sense of happiness. After reassuring him that happiness was truly within reach, she issued the first directive for him to achieve a better life. Moving closer to his face, she instructed the boy to close his eyes. She shared a deep, passionate kiss with him, acting as if they were truly a devoted couple. It was a possibility that had never even entered his thoughts. The unexpected kiss left him deep in thought, wondering what had prompted the sudden gesture. She explained that kissing triggers the release of oxytocin, a hormone that induces a profound sense of happiness and euphoria. One of her primary goals is to ensure that all her puppets are happy. She believes that a story is always more satisfying when it leads to a happy ending. It is for this reason that he will finally find true happiness. To reach that objective, absolute compliance with her every command is required. She has no use for a disobedient puppet, and should he ever rebel, she won't hesitate to break him. Shortly after, he was issued another command to follow. The girl asks him to reveal one of his desires, and seeing his hesitation, she rephrases the question by asking what he would wish for if he ever encountered a magical genie. When granted the opportunity to wish for anything imaginable, he sought retribution against everyone who had ever bullied him. Upon hearing the proposal, the girl voiced her full agreement, calling it an excellent idea. By clearly expressing his intentions, he ensured she would fulfill them, even though his true wish was for the exact opposite, a request that seemed to delight her. She reassured him, promising to make his wish a reality. As the day drew to a close, he finally made his way back home. He lay in bed with his arm wrapped in bandages, recovering from the injuries he sustained during the fall. Once more, he found himself questioning whether the girl was simply a total eccentric. Despite her promise to fulfill his wish, nothing had changed, leaving him to feel that he would have been better off dead. Ever since his first day of school, things had consistently gone poorly, and it was hard for him to believe he'd been targeted for such trivial reasons. In truth, his life held no value whatsoever. As he lost himself in thought, he found himself making a silent wish. It felt as though tomorrow would never arrive. Despite the circumstances, he still had to return to his life as a student. The building housing the charity has been left in a state of total destruction. Meanwhile, another person watched in total disbelief, shocked that he had actually returned. The boys complained that the trash was causing the entire room to reek. He was caught off guard by the realization that his arm was actually broken. He figured the boy must have taken a fall and was now in a great deal of pain. He struggled to decide what to write on his cast, and sensing he was about to be humiliated, he refused to let the other man add anything. Following that response, the boy's interest appeared to quickly fade. He dismissed the boy as a total mood killer, telling him he should just go sit back down. The unusual behavior felt out of place, however, leaving him deep in thought. As they headed toward his seat, one of them offered to show the group something truly impressive. He consistently follows his own whims, regardless of the circumstances. Predictably, he struck the boy from behind, the force of the impact sending him crashing to the floor along with several desks and chairs. The arrogant man boasted that his kick had been both clean and perfectly executed. He inquired if anyone had recorded his actions, and one of his friends confirmed they had captured the footage. They enjoyed reviewing the impressive recording, while the boy who had been assaulted slowly rose to his feet. This served as a clear sign of his recovery, indicating he was fully prepared for the second round. Changing his strategy, the man decided to settle the matter with his fists this time. However, the onslaught was halted before it could proceed any further. A girl stepped into the classroom and offered a warm greeting to everyone present. He recognized her as the girl from their previous encounter, and she curiously asked what they were up to. The arrogant man was immediately struck by her appearance and, taking an interest, inquired about which class she was in. The instructor introduced the girl to the group, explaining that she was a new transfer student joining their class. He was stunned to learn she was a transfer student, and even more so when he realized she was actually waiting for him. Annoyed by the news, the arrogant student demanded to know why they hadn't been told sooner. But the teacher simply reminded him that she had already announced it during the previous day's assembly. Recognizing his mistake, he apologized for not paying attention and politely asked for the girl's name. She introduced herself as Kamata Kubaro. Afterward, she discovered her name inscribed on the dark-skinned boy. Approaching the unpleasant man, she greeted him with a polite introduction. Seeing how lovely even her name was, he found himself wanting her phone number as well. The girls shared it amongst themselves without any friction. By scanning her QR code, the arrogant man added her to his friend list. He voiced his sincere hope that they could all find a way to get along. The obnoxious man then introduced himself as Relia. Watching the interaction unfold, the protagonist felt a profound sense of sadness. Eventually, the girl began to observe him with a look of genuine curiosity. She found herself curious to learn the name of the boy with the injured arm. She walked straight toward him, completely disregarding the jerk's presence. She mentioned that she had missed the opportunity to ask for his name the previous day. He hesitated with a slight stammer before finally offering a response. However, he introduced himself as Kiba Yudo. She complimented his name and expressed her genuine pleasure in meeting him. From his perspective, the fact that she showed any interest in him at all was a clear sign that she wasn't thinking straight. He then began to recount several embarrassing stories at Kava's expense. Approaching him, she questioned why she should give the matter any of her concern. To her, it seemed as though he was gearing up to tell a rather monotonous story. She turned toward the teacher and asked where her assigned seat was. She was informed that her assigned seat would be right next to Kiba. Convinced it was a twist of fate, she was overjoyed to finally be sitting right next to Kiba. The juror watched intently as every aspect of the situation unfolded before him. He stood there in stunned silence, unable to comprehend why the girl had chosen the other guy over him. In his eyes, Cavil was nothing more than a pathetic loser who had the misfortune of stepping in filth. He struggled to understand the reasoning behind why Cattle had been selected. With his phone in hand, he prepared to humiliate Tipple once more. He planned to invite the new girl to a virtual group and share a video documenting Kiba's humiliation. As the lunch break began, Kaiba and the girl decided to share a meal together. During their lunch break, Kabo suggested she find someone else to eat with, but she firmly refused. Ultimately, this presented the perfect opening for a strategic move. Even with his sandwich in hand, he remained completely oblivious to what she was suggesting. She questioned him, wondering if he had truly forgotten everything that had occurred the day before. Driven by a defensive impulse, they prepared to take revenge on everyone who had ever bullied him. She mentioned that she'd been invited to the class's virtual group and even showed him the invitation on her phone. The footage happened to be another recording capturing Kipple's humiliation. The arrogant man managed to grab her attention, only to be left fuming once she rejected him. Feeling humiliated by the footage playing out, Cable pleaded with her to stop watching. She told him there was no need for such a reaction since she had already seen the contents, admitting that she also feels self-conscious when she's undressed. This development only served to further agitate Killa. The state of affairs had become undeniably bleak. She questioned whether she should have watched it in the first place. He confirmed that she never should have gone through with it. Overcome with humiliation, he couldn't understand how she had managed to see it. While it may have seemed like a simple case of embarrassment, his actual situation was far more dire. While he tried to hide something he never wanted anyone to see, the girl questioned if this was truly what he had wished for. She then inquired whether the material had already been shared on a public platform. He double-checked and confirmed that he was indeed operating solo. A malicious smile spread across her face as she realized this situation might be identical to the previous one. They were even capable of displaying the original video themselves. To Kaba, the suggestion seemed completely absurd. Hipa refused to participate in such a humiliating act, reasoning that no rational person would ever agree to it. He questioned whether she had overheard any of his remarks, especially since he harbored a deep dislike for that video. The girl questioned whether that was truly his wish. He anticipated the video wouldn't go viral, which was precisely the outcome he wanted. Aware of the circumstances, she questioned whether he was truly committed to seeking revenge against those who had tormented him. Nevertheless, Kaba pointed out that there were alternative ways to seek retribution against them. Given the situation, she questioned exactly how he planned to execute his revenge. Under her watchful gaze, he found himself at a complete loss for what to do next. While he could shift his strategy, doing so would come with a significant trade-off. Regardless, his options were limited now that the video was already in the hands of others. The experience forced him to confront the harsh and unforgiving nature of his reality. He understood that revenge never comes without risk, and he was far too experienced to believe otherwise. He was left feeling completely disappointed and discouraged. The girl even began to sympathize with the difficult situation he was facing. She reminded him that only a day earlier, he had been on the verge of taking his own life. Provided he had the strength to maintain his footing on the ledge, this situation was of little concern to him. It's possible that when the moment arrived, you simply lacked the nerve to follow through with the plan he had set for yesterday. Visibly frustrated, he declared his firm resolve to see his plan through to the end. She watched him, her expression reflecting a clear sense of satisfaction. If he were truly committed, this situation wouldn't be difficult for him in the slightest. She had even gone as far as setting up her own account. She had even gone through the effort of writing the post for him. All that remained was for him to press the button and finalize the upload. The video's description struck him as rather unusual. They put on a convincing act, making it seem as though they were bullying him. It was as though the person responsible were openly confessing to the crime he had committed. This approach offered a much more reliable way to ensure justice was finally served. That one video was destined to command everyone's attention. Being a brand new account, it didn't have any followers yet, but he knew that leveraging viral hashtags would make it easy to gain traction. The footage of his public humiliation was certain to go viral across the internet. With their part complete, all that remained was to step back and let society dispense its own justice. Concerned, he began to realize the potential trouble this could bring upon his school. She offered him a sobering reminder that the school had no genuine concern for his well-being. Ultimately, he was the only one who could truly save himself. He concluded that it was pointless to worry about the adults who were willing to assist him. He understood that failing to take action would leave him miserable for the remainder of his days. This was far from the result he had envisioned for himself. In an attempt to comfort him, she explained that everything would be fine as long as he followed her instructions. This was the only way for them to achieve genuine happiness. Furthermore, she was committed to always being by his side to ensure his safety. Holding the phone in his hand, he hesitated for a brief moment before finally making the post. With just one click, the video was officially released to the internet. Initially, he was under the impression that no one had realized what was actually happening. He felt certain that the post would go unnoticed, considering it was shared from an account with no followers. Within seconds, however, the reactions finally began to flood in. His post quickly gained traction, drawing in a massive wave of new followers. Similarly, the onlookers began to voice their growing anger over the bully's actions. Caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, he inadvertently dropped his drink onto the floor. Standing behind him, the girl offered her congratulations, praising him for a job well done. She retrieved the phone from the floor, noting that their only remaining task was to wait. He concluded that it would be best to head back to the classroom. Elsewhere, a student rushed toward the bully to deliver some urgent news. Confused by the situation, he followed his classmate's suggestion to check the class crew, only for Evie to be met with a sight he could hardly believe. He remained completely unaware of my actions, as I viewed the online post as nothing more than a trivial matter. In time, the memory would fade, ensuring their school remained undiscovered even by those who went looking for it. Not a single person possessed the nerve to display it in such a setting. After a classmate departed, an unfamiliar man spoke up, questioning if anyone truly possessed the courage to step forward. Despite his unassuming appearance, he was actually a streamer who specialized in exactly this type of content. Regardless, the bully failed to grasp the significance, completely unaware that such a specific niche even existed on the internet. Despite his unassuming appearance, he actually boasted a following of 5,000. Surprisingly, even the jerk found himself genuinely impressed. It was a genuinely impressive sight to behold. On that day, the boy was scheduled to appear as a guest during one of his live streams. Still confused by the unfolding events, he was instructed by the man to put some clothes on. Feeling uneasy about the man's advances, he struck him across the face with a sharp slap. Turning toward his phone, he asked his viewers if they had witnessed the boy striking him. He claimed it was simply an accident, But the other man questioned if that was truly the best excuse he could come up with. He questioned if he used that same excuse on his victims, especially when he teamed up with other thugs to harass those who couldn't defend themselves. Attempting to defend their actions, the boys insisted they were merely joking around. Glancing at his phone once more, he told his viewers about the confrontation involving the jerk, quickly adding that he was only kidding. He remarked that the man was undoubtedly a piece of trash, standing out as the absolute worst even among other lowlifes. It's individuals like him who ultimately undermine the very society they inhabit. As a result, he mentioned that he had lessons to conduct. This was mainly due to his reputation as a total lowlife. Justice was dealt swiftly as the group began to pummel the man for his actions. Even while writhing in pain from the blow, the jerk still had the audacity to ask why he was being beaten. The live stream footage became blurry as he focused on striking his opponent while still trying to film the encounter. He then turned to his audience, asking if they had witnessed what just occurred. While some felt that striking the jerk was an overreaction, he defended himself by claiming he never actually hit the boy. He pointed out that the man was wearing the channel's badge, which served as a form of consent for anyone appearing on the stream. Ultimately, he confessed it was all a ruse, demonstrating that he had played his part with remarkable skill. Glancing at his phone, he reassured his audience that no one had actually been harmed. A debate erupted among the viewers, with many defending his actions as a justified response to the church's hostility. Meanwhile, the pathetic man remained standing idly in the background. He had one final question for the arrogant man. He questioned the reasoning behind his decision to trust the young boy. The obnoxious individual took quite a while before finally offering a response. He reflected deeply on the true motivations behind his actions. He recalled the sight of Cable walking with an impeccably straight posture. He found Keeper to be a genuinely likable and impressive individual. Driven by this motive, he decided to approach him. He approached the boy, intending to strike up a conversation. He mentioned that he had overheard a group of girls discussing Tiba. As he entered the fray and began to fight, it became clear that Hibob was a highly prominent figure. By creating a distraction, he caused Kabata to step directly into a pile of animal waste. In an unfortunate turn of events, Kaba appeared to be wearing the sneakers just as two girls approached him from nearby. His very first observation about Kiva was the simple fact that he had stepped in dog poop. The girls intervened and told him to stop picking on Kiba, making it clear they didn't find his teasing funny at all. He joked that the situation was like slipping on a banana peel, but the girls remarked that such a dry, unfunny sense of humor was typical for him. Regardless, he maintained that this was ultimately the best outcome for Kiba. At the very least, he now had an entertaining story to share. Clearly agitated, Cabell shrugged the man's hand off his shoulder and stated that he wasn't finding the situation amusing in the slightest. Initially, the arrogant man found himself completely speechless. The way Kaba was watching him made him feel quite uneasy. He then clarified that his true intention was simply to build a friendship with Kaiba. Unconvinced by the story, the streamer suspected he was merely playing the victim to escape judgment. It was a truly pathetic sight as he wiped the front of his shoe against the man's face. Upon returning to school, he learned that the jerk had been attacked during the lunch hour. As the students buzzed with rumors about what had actually transpired, the school notified the authorities, who had already taken the perpetrator into custody. The injuries sustained from the beating were severe enough that the man required medical attention. Following an early dismissal from their teacher, the classroom was abuzz with students gossiping about what had happened to the jerk. Kid Butt slowly began to grasp the reality of what had just transpired. The girl standing beside him believed this outcome was actually in his best interest. By accomplishing this, they had finally reached their ultimate objective. From that point forward, his days of being mistreated were finally over. Kaiba harbored lingering doubts about his choice, quietly reflecting on the decision even as their conversation continued. The video continued to gain momentum as it circulated across the internet. Truth be told, he was feeling completely overwhelmed by terror. However, that was far from the only sensation he was experiencing. The girl proposed that they skip school the following day and go on a date instead. Thoroughly captivated, he was eager to see what kind of future she had planned for him. After returning home, he found himself unable to shake the thoughts lingering in his mind. She reflected on the moment she had suggested they go on a date together. As a result, he was unable to find even a single moment of rest. He began to wonder if he'd even bothered to comb his hair. Before long, he realized that a sense of anxiety was starting to set in. At this point, he is still just an ordinary man. To everyone's surprise, the beautiful girl agreed to go out with him. She was delighted to see him and asked why he was dressed in his school uniform. He explained that his parents would notice if he left in anything but his school uniform, so he intended to change in the bathroom instead. Acknowledging the situation, she gave him the signal that he could finally begin his transformation. Once inside the bathroom, however, he found himself completely at a loss for what to do next. In that brief instant, he felt a profound sense of peace and absolute satisfaction. He felt certain that Girdle posed a threat in one way or another. Her beauty was undeniable, and like most men, he found himself easily swayed by such a stunning woman. Upon your return, you noticed several men gathered around her, attempting to flirt. The moment she sensed him drawing near, she immediately took notice. Approaching him with a smile, she remarked that he had certainly taken his time. He backed away, convinced that she must already have a boyfriend. Once they were reunited, she suggested that they take a trip to the aquarium. It was only after entering her company that he finally grasped the reality of the situation. The sheer beauty of the moment made everything feel more like a dream than reality. The young girl found herself deeply captivated by the wonders of marine life. He was struck by the whale shark's massive scale. They spent the entire day there, capturing numerous photos to document their time. He spent his time observing a wide variety of animals. Even the dessert they ordered was beautifully presented. As they sat at the table, she checked in to see if Kettle was genuinely enjoying himself. He responded by confirming that he was indeed the one. She truly appreciated receiving such a gesture from him. Once they were settled, he asked her what the reason was behind the invitation. She explained that her actions were all driven by a desire to secure his future. Initially, he struggled to see any connection between this outing and his eventual future. She explained that, as time went on, he would eventually find himself wanting to fall in love and go on dates. The date served as an introductory lesson, designed to teach him how to refine his behavior and present himself as a more engaging person. He realized he needed to gain some experience beforehand to avoid sabotaging his first actual date. In the end, that entire day had been nothing more than a simple practice session. Intrigued, he began to ask her on a date, but she cut him off with a firm rejection before he could even finish his sentence. She spoke more bluntly, clarifying that she didn't harbor any romantic feelings for him. In truth, they were still little more than strangers to one another. In fact, she had absolutely no interest in pursuing romance. Her only desire was to continue playing with her puppets. Her only purpose was to pull the strings from behind the scenes, guiding him toward a life of happiness. She viewed him as nothing more than a puppet, existing solely to be manipulated at her whim. They spent the remainder of the day in high spirits, making the most of their time together. They spent their time snapping photos and enjoying the light-hearted moment together. Eventually, the moment arrived for them to part ways. Expressing her gratitude for the pleasant day, she inquired whether he would be able to make it back home on time. Given that it was still relatively early, the timing wouldn't present any issues. He understood that she had finally said her final goodbye. She explained that she had already compiled the photos from that day into an album. This left Kiba feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Suddenly, the familiar buzz of his phone caught his attention. He realized the person calling him was his father. Upon answering, he was immediately met with a barrage of complaints from his father, who had discovered he'd been skipping school. The teacher had just called on him, leaving Kibut feeling thoroughly humiliated. His father strictly forbade him from returning, even expressing a cold wish that he would perish on the journey home. It was the kind of heartless remark that only a truly despicable father could direct toward his own child. This lack of consideration was a major reason he dreaded speaking with his father, a man who rarely bothered to think before he spoke. Sensing he was in a difficult position, the girl checked to see if he was all right. She offered an apology, taking full responsibility for causing him to miss school that day. He remained unfazed, having accepted the invitation with full knowledge of the risks involved. Intrigued by his response, she questioned whether he was on bad terms with his family. It was clear that the two of them shared a deeply strained relationship. They could hardly bring themselves to meet each other's gaze. She apologized for raising the subject, adding that people should truly appreciate their families. She clarified, however, that he was under no obligation to follow through. Observing his expression, it was evident just how much the situation was weighing on him. Regardless of the target, wishing for someone's death was always an act of cruelty. She suggested that if he truly disliked his family, he should simply run away. She offered him the choice to join her, should he wish to go. Her choice of words was quite bold, especially for someone who claimed to have no romantic interest in him. He realized he couldn't simply start relying on her. She brought up the concept of unconditional love, though the remark seemed entirely out of context. Noticing his confusion, she explained that since she lacked any feelings for him, she held no romantic or physical expectations, and therefore no ulterior motives. Her only goal was to save him, and she questioned why that wasn't enough. His memories began to blur as he thought back to the pivotal day when everything changed. That was the exact day he realized he had fallen in love with her. As he held her close, he felt certain that he had truly fallen for her. She suggested they return home, as a new plan had just come to mind. He picked up a variety of snacks from a convenience store to prepare for the party. She then inquired if he enjoyed watching movies. She made a habit of renting movies every week, and shyly eventually admitted that he shared her interest in them. They headed to the convenience store to pick up necessities, including some kibble while passing through Temata. He expressed his sincere gratitude for all her support, though she modestly downplayed her actions as nothing out of the ordinary. She pointed out that using her family name felt too formal for friends, and suggested he start calling her by her first name instead. The boy was left completely flustered, and despite her attempts to get him to say her name, he found himself unable to do it. Feeling responsible for the situation, he ended up offering her an apology. "You thanked your companion for stocking up on plenty of snacks during your shopping trip." She gestured toward a massive building, identifying it as her home, which led him to realize she lived in a remarkably high-end residence. Opening the door, she welcomed him to step inside. He remarked on the apartment's surprisingly spacious interior. When he inquired about her parents, the girl informed him that they weren't around. She resided in that apartment completely by herself. As she sat on the sofa, she asked him to stay and keep her company. She asked if he had any movie preferences, and while he initially said he didn't mind, he mentioned one specific film he was curious about that she also wanted to see. The two of them reached an agreement to watch the movie together. Meanwhile, the pair remained on the couch, focused on the movie. Kiba paused to reflect on just how peaceful everything felt in that moment. Filled with tension, he silently hoped that the moment would last forever. However, his phone soon began to ring once again. He soon realized that the man standing before him was actually his father. The girl reassured him that it was all right, encouraging him to go ahead and answer. Stepping outside, he sought to learn exactly what his father required of him. Despite everything, he was still his father, and there was a chance his concern was actually sincere. The moment Kiva picked up, he was met with his father's furious voice on the other end. He explained that he was currently at a friend's house, having been granted permission to stay the night. This further incensed his father, who demanded that Keben return home immediately. He was sure Cabo was at a girl's house and said young boys like him were too naive, adding that he was on his way to pick him up. Kiba's frustration only intensified as his father continued to hold back from attacking. Kiba shared the same reluctance about heading back home. Opening the door, the girl checked on him to see if he was doing all right. She offered an apology, admitting that she had overheard the entire conversation. Observing his father's tendency to raise his voice when agitated, she suggested it would be best for Kiba to head home for now. She then remembered there was no need for him to leave, as his father had already arranged to pick him up. Ultimately, they decided to stay put and wait for him to arrive. His father arrived much sooner than anticipated and was already waiting just outside. Demanding that Kiba come down immediately, he revealed that he had already tracked his location using his phone's GPS. Kuba's anger only intensified after he discovered that a spying app had been installed on his phone. As the girl suggested they head downstairs, Cabin noticed she was holding an envelope in her hands. She promised to speak with his father and persuade him that Kiba should be allowed to stay. Though Kiba was confused by the request, he followed her instructions to wait at the entrance. It was a direct order, and he knew better than to defy her. His father rudely insulted her, labeling her a tramp who was only interested in seducing his son. He remarked that she had even gone so far as to dress the part. Deep down, Kiba sensed that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Unaware of the extent of his father's power, he suggested that you should also head outside. The moment his father caught sight of him, he reacted immediately. He firmly announced that Kibble would be returning home with him. The girl then handed the man the envelope she had been holding. Packed with cash, she had kept this stash ready specifically for an emergency like this. She urged him to take the money and depart, leaving Kibo in her care. Baffled by the sudden turn of events, Kedva convinced himself it was nothing more than an elaborate joke. She asserted that if $1 million wasn't enough, it didn't even count as a request. He was clearly not the kind of father any mother would entrust her child to, especially not for the sake of dirty money. He cruelly accused her of earning the money by selling her body, judging her based on her provocative appearance. Kiba attempted to intervene, urging his father to stop. She recommended he explore alternative options like investing, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He likely assumed that was the only way for a woman to acquire such wealth. He was, in truth, a remarkably uninspired and wretched individual. With him as her father, a happy life was simply out of the question for Kippa. Clearly annoyed, he asserted that the decision was not hers to make. The girl, however, still had a question she wanted to ask him. What could have possibly driven him to tell his own son to die? The man claimed that his actions were driven by his own best interests. Back when he was his son's age, his superiors drilled the same philosophy into him, that the weak have no place in this world. They were ruthless with him, forcing him to earn his position through sheer hardship. Upon hearing this, the girl couldn't help but break into laughter. He struggled to understand what she found so amusing, while she dismissed the entire tale as utterly absurd. His behavior made it clear he lacked any genuine affection for his son, leading her to wonder how he would respond to the boy's death, only for him to dismissively remark that people don't just die on command. Contrary to his expectations, they managed to pull it off with surprising ease. The impact is even more profound when the words are coming from their own parent. It's impossible for him to be unaware of his son's true feelings, given that he is, after all, his father. Now convinced, the man admitted he had been completely unaware of the boy's true feelings. Regardless, he labeled him a coward, asserting that this was exactly why he was teaching him how to become a man. She corrected his misconception, explaining that true education required far more than just spoken words. After their discussion, she was finally able to piece the entire truth together. Ultimately, that man proved to be entirely irrelevant to Kiva's happiness. From that point on, his happiness rested entirely in her hands. The man's fury only intensified as he dismissed her ignorance and accused her of scheming to marry his son. She explained that establishing a peaceful family environment is the essential first step toward a truly happy life. To secure that future for him, she committed to helping Tidal elevate his reputation, intellect, and list of achievements. However, she wasn't the one destined to start a family with him. Instead, she would merely serve as his strategic control tower. From that point on, she intended to demonstrate that Kiva could only find true happiness while under her authority. The weight of such a bold declaration left them both lost in contemplation. He dismissed the entire situation as a joke, viewing her as nothing more than a child. If she truly possessed those abilities, he challenged her to prove it right then and there. Picking up her phone, she stated that she wouldn't waste another moment. She approached her father to revisit the topic they had discussed earlier. She demanded he handle the matter immediately before abruptly ending the call. The man remained confused by the unfolding events until his phone unexpectedly began to ring. The company president was left completely taken aback by the turn of events. The girl urged him to respond, noting that the matter seemed urgent. He answered the call, and the person on the other end immediately apologized for reaching out so unexpectedly. They voiced their appreciation for the work he had accomplished. Ultimately, they explained that releasing him was necessary and offered an apology for the choice they had made. They pleaded with him not to harbor any resentment, reminding him that they also had families to provide for. Once the call concluded, he questioned if she was behind it all, and it turned out she was indeed responsible. She explained that she had requested her father's help and inquired whether he was familiar with the Tamada real estate group. He recognized them instantly, seeing as their corporation had recently acquired the company he worked for. As it turns out, that very company was under the leadership of her father. The girl took a direct approach, simply asking her father to dismiss him from his position. This situation led her back to the original proposal she had first presented to him. She was even willing to approach her father about rehiring him. She warned him that if he continued to resist, she would use her influence to ensure he was never hired anywhere else. Frustrated, he dismissed her claim as a mere joke, but she stood her ground, leaving the next move entirely up to him. Regardless of the circumstances, the reality remained that he had been fired. As a mature adult, he should have clearly understood what the right decision was. Overwhelmed by disappointment, the man slumped to the ground, realizing he was left with no other options. The girl held out the envelope, and he snatched it from her while seething with anger. As it turned out, his decision had been the correct one after all. Turning her attention back to Keep Out, she informed him that she had successfully cleared an obstacle from his path. With the disruption settled, they were finally able to return to their movie in peace. She took hold of his arm, pulling him along to quicken their pace. Cuba returned to his apartment, still reeling in disbelief over the events that had just unfolded. While in the principal's office, the boy explained that he had only followed through because the girl insisted on it. Now the others were eager to uncover the true nature of Kipa's relationship with her. Deciding not to dwell on the matter any further, he resolved to ask the boy directly. After returning to the apartment, they were finally able to finish watching their movie. Had she succeeded in her actions, he would finally be free from his father's influence. At last, he felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. Simultaneously, he found himself questioning whether he was making the right choice. Despite the risks of leaving home as a minor, he felt deeply grateful to her for providing him with a place to stay. He couldn't help but feel uncertain about the future, especially since he had already severed all ties with everyone in his life. Despite everything, they were still his family, leaving him to wonder how his mother would react once she discovered the truth. She would likely remain silent, as she had always followed his father's lead. Noticing his distant expression, the girl realized he was lost in thought and asked if anything was troubling him. She inquired if he felt any lingering concern about what had transpired. Given the circumstances, he wouldn't judge him, especially since the man had only just been separated from his family. Regardless, she offered him reassurance that everything would ultimately be all right. She committed herself to his happiness, vowing to make that promise a reality. Tiba sought to understand the reasons behind her consistent behavior. The somber atmosphere finally cleared once she admitted she had actually enjoyed herself. Touched by the story's emotional weight, the Unkeba gave his agreement. While the final scene was impressive, she felt it leaned a bit too heavily into familiar tropes. She suggested another movie to watch next, leaving him surprised that they were actually going to sit through a second film. While she initially assumed he was reluctant, he surprised her by revealing that he was actually quite eager. They ultimately settled on a romance movie, a classic choice for any couple spending their date night at home. She explained that these experiences would serve as valuable preparation for his future. He found it difficult to believe such a thing could happen to him, but for the time being, she just wanted them to focus on enjoying the movie. Unfamiliar with this genre of film, he found himself feeling a bit uneasy. A romantic scene featuring a kiss then began to play across the screen. The situation dragged on far longer than he had initially anticipated. Overwhelmed by the sheer embarrassment of the situation, he was caught off guard when the girl reached out and touched his hand. She took a moment to share her thoughts on the situation. Custom dictates that you should hold hands with the person washing alongside you. She then stepped in to show him exactly how it was supposed to be done. Capitalizing on their physical closeness, she suggested that they share a kiss as well. Ultimately, the situation proved to be more than he could handle. He firmly insisted that they were strictly forbidden from doing so, regardless of the situation. Intrigued by his apparent hesitation, she initially believed he didn't want to kiss her, but upon realizing his true feelings, she insisted that was the perfect reason to give it a try. She explained that because she had no intention of giving in to him, they shouldn't be kissing. He advised her that she needed to start showing more self-respect. The girl dismissed his singing as nothing more than nonsense. She mentioned she wouldn't mind kissing him, but he countered that her willingness was precisely the problem. She realized that fostering false expectations would be unfair to someone she had just rejected. She found the situation quite peculiar, especially since he had never actually confessed his feelings to her. He then brought up their trip to the aquarium, reminding her of the moment she claimed she didn't like him. He explained that he was merely pushing back against her influence in their relationship, but her reaction left him deeply confused, leading her to finally understand why he felt so rejected. From his perspective, the girl could be a real headache to deal with at times. Furthermore, being in a relationship meant they shouldn't treat kissing as such a casual act. Regardless of her desire for his happiness, she still should have maintained a sense of morality. In response to his stubborn attitude, she declared that she would no longer kiss him. Thinking of his future, she still hoped he would gain some experience in the realm of romance. Upon hearing those words, the boy found himself completely at a loss for words. She then proposed a plan to help him find a girlfriend during school the following day. Upon reaching their destination, she suggested they skip the pleasantries and get right to business. That day, he made the conscious choice to disrupt the romantic comedy he was living in. When she asked if he had feelings for anyone, the only person who came to his mind was her. Keeping his true thoughts to himself, he admitted he didn't have anyone special in mind. Having been bullied for so long, he never had the chance to make friends or fall in love. giving her the perfect opening to start their relationship. Kiba pointed out that the situation was far more complex than it appeared. She quickly reassured him, insisting that he had nothing to worry about. With his decent looks, it was only a matter of time before he formed a connection with a girl. He found himself questioning whether the remark was actually intended as a compliment. She then instructed him to direct his gaze toward a specific spot. The girl appeared to be having a difficult time as she worked to clear the blackboard. She suggested he step in to help, hoping it might be his chance to finally become her hero. Carrying out these tasks simply because he was told to left him with a strange sense of unease. Regardless, he approached the girl to check if she was all right and see if she needed any assistance. Ultimately, he took it upon himself to clear the board for her. With the objective finally complete, she expressed her gratitude, her face radiating pure joy. He offered a reassuring smile, insisting that it wasn't any trouble at all. She felt certain that if she ever needed assistance again, he would be the person she'd turn to. The other girl praised his efforts and suggested that fame was just around the corner, though he maintained that achieving it wouldn't be so simple. She corrected him, arguing that kindness is a vital virtue that most people often fail to appreciate. Many people often forget that simple kindness is a crucial, yet frequently overlooked part of flirting. Judging by the expression on the girl's face, it appeared that she truly valued that small act of kindness. At least that was her version of events. However, he found himself puzzled by her suggestion that he should write his own romantic comedy. As he worked on cleaning the hallway floor, he was interrupted by someone calling out his name. He recognized her as the girl he had assisted earlier, and she approached him simply to express her gratitude. Noticing his delayed response, she reminded him of the time he helped clean the blackboard. But Kada assured her it was no trouble at all. While he felt a personal visit was unnecessary just to thank him, she disagreed, needing to deliver a message that might seem quite sudden. Overcome by embarrassment, the girl found herself unable to proceed. She quickly apologized, explaining that she had simply bitten her tongue by mistake. In reality, she was hoping to ask if he would accompany her home. He was caught off guard by the sudden realization that they were now completely alone. She cautioned him not to misinterpret her intentions. His only goal was to pick up some donuts from the new shop that had recently opened near the station. With no friends to accompany her, she explained that her reserved nature often kept her isolated. She recalled Kaba's earlier offer to provide assistance whenever she might need it. With tears welling in her eyes, her silence served as a clear refusal. He reassured her that it wasn't an issue, stating that he would be more than happy to accompany her. She thanked him cheerfully and suggested they meet up after school. After she left Tomatoes, he successfully managed to secure a date for after school. Regardless, he knew that admitting he was currently living with another girl was simply not an option. He chose to keep those thoughts to himself, as he was clearly at a loss for how to manage the situation. He felt as though he'd been caught in the middle of a manufactured love triangle. His actions weighed heavily on him, filling him with a deep sense of guilt. He then recalled that Tamada didn't harbor any feelings for him. He even intended to release her at the earliest opportunity. He remained uncertain about what the future had in store for him. Nevertheless, he understood that building new connections and broadening his perspective was essential. Previously, the relentless bullying he endured had made such a thing completely impossible. At long last, he was finally in a position to appreciate the world around him. Despite his agreement to go on the date, the girl still had one final request for him. She was eager to hear the full story of what had happened. She handed him a pen that was actually a disguised microphone. He was also fitted with an earpiece, allowing her to discreetly feed him exactly what he needed to say. This ensured her instructions could be followed regardless of the distance between them. Even in the midst of her grief, she still tried to maintain a sense of humor. After saying her goodbyes, she wished him the best of luck with his upcoming gate. An immense burden had been placed squarely on his shoulders. As he remained lost in thought, he was suddenly interrupted by someone calling out to him. When his date arrived and asked if he'd been waiting long, he simply reassured her that he hadn't. Leaving the school grounds behind, they began making their way toward the train station. Kipa was now fully outfitted with a listening device and a set of earphones. The entire situation felt far too bizarre for him to process comfortably. Tamada then tested the earphones, asking him if he could hear her voice clearly. If he was able, he was instructed to tap his ear twice as a signal. It is highly probable that he followed through with it. He had to listen closely to her every word, repeating them back to her one at a time. Tasked to begin immediately, he listened to her instructions while suspecting the entire situation was just a joke. He could have simply asked the girl if she liked donuts. After she agreed, he mentioned that he also shared a fondness for that particular sweet treat. He repeated his words, feeling a crushing sense of embarrassment wash over him. At last, they arrived at the location she had previously described. As she continued to lead the way, he admitted that he had never been to this place before. This shop was quite different from the establishments he typically frequented. Surveying the items, he found them all so appetizing that he struggled to make a final choice. She expressed a desire to sample every flavor, though she admitted that finishing even 2 donuts by herself would be more than she could manage. After expressing his understanding of her feelings, he received a suggestion through his earpiece to propose they share a donut together. Glancing at the girl, he decided to follow the suggestion, though her brief silence made him wonder if she was secretly reluctant. She made it clear that the situation didn't bother her, as long as he was by her side. Satisfied with the outcome, they were finally able to place their order. He reassured her, explaining that in addition to the donut, he was also getting a drink for her. She found herself struck by his genuine kindness and considerate nature. He returned to the table with their order, presenting a plate of donuts that looked incredibly appetizing. Expressing her gratitude for his kindness, she offered to pay for her portion of the order. His instructions were clear. He was to decline the payment and deliver a specific message along with the refusal. He reassured her that the cost was of no concern, marking yet another instance of his ongoing generosity. Insisting she would feel guilty otherwise, the girl refused to let him pay, leading him to take her hands and follow the instruction to say something else. He explained his intention to act as a gentleman for once and asked for her permission to do so. Feeling overwhelmed by the situation, she ultimately agreed that it was fine. After everything that had transpired, she inquired if there was a girl who was capable enough. Tamada felt energized by the progress they were making, though he confessed that he didn't have any romantic interests at the time. She found this fortunate, explaining that she would have felt compelled to eliminate anyone he developed feelings for. Her words weren't just nonsensical. It was clear the girl had completely lost her grip on reality. Wearing a smile, she clarified that she was only joking. Echoing the words from his earpiece, he remarked that her personality was quite intense. The sudden fright nearly caused his heart to stop from the shock. Afterward, it seemed as though the girl had something she wanted to ask him. She remarked that the words he spoke felt genuinely like his own. She was curious and questioned the reason behind the earpiece he was wearing. Once the device was removed, Tomato came to the realization that she could no longer offer him any assistance. He explained that he had been listening to music before their encounter, and, surprisingly, it was still playing. Unconvinced by his explanation, she remained certain he was still withholding the truth. Her visible nervousness was quickly replaced by a sudden and sharp shift in her mood. Overcome with emotion, the girl began to cry, believing he never truly cared for her, while Kiba desperately tried to salvage the situation by insisting she was wrong. She brushed the matter aside, convinced that someone as remarkable as him would never take notice of her, and apologized under the assumption that he simply wanted to head home. He clarified that those weren't his true feelings. Truth be told, he had genuinely enjoyed their conversation. He asked if she was still open to the idea of going on more dates with him. She expressed her interest in continuing their discussion once they had finished up there. She extended an invitation asking if he would be interested in coming over to her house. Cabell was caught off guard by the proposal, suspecting that you might actually be hesitant to accept. He found himself at a crossroads, realizing that following her would mean leaving Tamada waiting. Unable to leave her while she was so distressed, he decided to stay by her side. He accepted her request, though he felt a lingering sense of guilt for keeping Tomato waiting. The primary condition of their arrangement was that he could never be left alone at her place. After stepping inside, he formally requested permission to enter. When he inquired if she lived by herself, she confirmed that she was indeed living alone. While her parents were constantly preoccupied with work, they made sure to send her enough money to support herself. Shaken expressed how deeply she appreciated the parents she was raised by. She invited him to settle in while she went to prepare some tea. Kiba offered his full support, completely unaware of the actions she was about to take. She delivered a powerful blow to his head, swinging the vase with brutal force. He collapsed to the ground, completely helpless as his wounds bled profusely. Ultimately, she told him she would be borrowing his phone for a brief moment. She had long suspected that he had been deceiving her from the very beginning. Upon checking his messages, she found evidence confirming that he had been talking to another girl. She would teach him a quick lesson, doing so for the benefit of the other girls as well. Tamada had already arrived, noting that the girl was proving to be even more intriguing than she had first anticipated. His consciousness gradually began to slip away. Upon regaining consciousness, he discovered that his entire body had been tightly bound. Hovering directly over him, the eccentric girl was dressed only in her underwear and seemed overjoyed that he had finally woken up. He grew flustered, unable to comprehend why she was barely dressed. She explained that she had removed her clothes simply because she couldn't stand the thought of remaining in blood-stained garments. He was struck with a wave of anxiety when she declared that his punishment would begin immediately. She accused him of faking his feelings for the other girl and toying with her heart, declaring that she would never forgive him for his actions. He insisted that this had never been his intention. He then inquired about the identity of the girl she had been mentioning. She clarified that she was actually speaking about Arijara Rio. Hearing her refer to herself in the third person solidified his belief that the girl was completely unhinged. She clarified the situation, revealing that she was actually the girl's older sister, Reina. He found the situation peculiar, as the two of them appeared to be identical. She clarified that this was to be expected, considering they both shared the same physical form. She then asked him if he was familiar with the term split personality. It appeared that this was an entirely new concept for him to grasp. Her parents had grown increasingly distant lately, though they weren't always so absent from her life. They subjected her to frequent physical abuse for the smallest reasons, often locking her away in the garden shed as punishment. The young girl pleaded with them, desperately begging for her release. Overcome with terror, she would plead for her father to open the door. Despite her desperate screams, her panic only intensified as she realized her cries were having no effect. Overwhelmed by a sense of total despair, she found herself yearning for someone to come to her rescue. It was at this moment that his secondary personality finally surfaced. He acted with the specific intent of ensuring she would feel the pain. To accomplish her objective, she required the use of the girl's physical form. She gave her word that she would keep her safe. This was how she was brought into the world, born with the sole purpose of protecting Rio, despite her own right to pursue a happy life. This was exactly why she despised men who toyed with her emotions, and she was now determined to make him regret every action he had taken against her. She chose to focus on his eyes as her starting point. She intended to disfigure his handsome face with the sharp edge of her blade. She was filled with anticipation as she prepared to slice into his face. In a desperate attempt to de-escalate, he tried to reason with her, but she had already moved far beyond the reach of words. He attempted to clarify his true intentions, but before she could respond, the sound of the doorbell announced a visitor's arrival. The unhinged girl declared that she would simply ignore whoever it happened to be. However, the constant running made it impossible for her to settle down and begin her work. As the doorknob began to rattle, she found herself wondering if someone was merely playing a prank on her. The noise was undeniably suspicious, as it became clear that the person wasn't just rattling the doorknob, but was actively trying to force their way inside. As the door swung open, Kamada was finally able to get a clear view of the situation unfolding inside. Thoroughly restrained, Cabell found himself pinned down by a clearly unstable individual. With various methods at her disposal, opening the door proved to be a simple task for her. She finally encountered a situation she knew exactly how to handle. She expressed her complete revulsion at the unfolding events. Kiba scrambled to clear up the misunderstanding, emphasizing that he was in dire need of her help. She retorted that the current situation was a direct result of his refusal to listen to her. After identifying the person on the other end of the call, the unstable girl received confirmation and immediately vowed to kill her as well. Tamada offered an apology, explaining that she never meant to cause any distress. Ultimately, her only wish was for Kiba to experience the warmth of genuine love. The nonsensical statement left the erratic girl completely baffled. Insisting it was a lie, she argued that her constant guidance wouldn't be necessary otherwise, but Kamada corrected her, noting that she had only been providing him with instructions. After she laid out the instructions, he followed her orders without hesitation. Ultimately, Kaiba had placed his very life in her hands. He could anticipate exactly what he would say, right down to the specific shoes he would choose to wear. From that point forward, every decision he made would be entirely up to her. Ultimately, he was destined to lead a peaceful and happy life. She questioned the unstable girl, asking if she didn't also find the situation wonderful. While keeping the boy bound in her home, the unstable girl dismissed everything she had heard as nonsense, declaring that Tomato was truly insane. Far from questioning her own sanity, she remained completely steadfast in every claim she made. Protecting herself with a knife, the crazy woman told them not to mess with her. She closed the distance, pressing toward Tamada with clear aggression. She asserted that Rito was not a mere plaything to be trifled with. In an attempt to stabilize the situation, someone suggested she take a moment to calm down. Claiming to be perfectly composed, the unstable woman then ordered Tomato to remain silent. It wasn't long before the group realized that this individual was suffering from a severe personality disorder. He warned that Rito might eventually regret her actions, as taking the boy's life would leave her a murderer with no memory of the crime. After saying this, the crazy woman began to look pensive. The momentary distraction provided the perfect opening to seize the knife from her grasp. After disarming her, she reached out and gripped the girl's head with both hands. Catching her completely off guard, she leaned in for a sudden kiss. She proposed the possibility of everyone finding happiness together. To achieve this, she takes it upon herself to lead everyone toward a happier future. Rio found it hard to believe that such a thing was actually possible. Tamada offers his reassurance, insisting that she truly has what it takes to make it a reality. She acknowledged the girl's difficult past, promising that her life would be much more enjoyable from this point forward. She still found herself at a loss, unsure of how she could ever achieve true happiness. Together they began brainstorming potential ways to resolve the situation. He quickly concluded that she had no idea how this would be possible. Happiness often manifests in a variety of different forms. Whether it's raising a family, diving into a hobby, or building a career, everyone defines happiness in their own way. Faced with a multitude of choices, she steps in to help her navigate the decisions ahead. She then inquired if she would also like to become one of her puppets. Despite everything she had been told, the information simply failed to make any logical sense. In reality, her behavior appeared completely unhinged, as it defied all logical explanation. Internally, she found herself able to intuitively grasp the situation. She struggled to comprehend why his words felt so strangely alluring. Every instinct she possessed urged her not to let this opportunity slip away. She was prepared to follow her every command, leaving the direction of her entire life in the other girl's hands. Ultimately, she realizes that the same thing had happened to Kebab. She dismissed the suggestion, finding the entire proposal to be completely absurd. Despite her reservations, she ultimately decided to follow the girl's instructions. With their terms reached, the matter between them was finally resolved. Now there would be a very simple order for her to carry out. She was told to chest the boy tied to the bed. After all, every classic fairy tale traditionally concludes with the prince and princess sharing a kiss and living happily ever after. Now everything depends on whether she chooses to follow the orders she was given. She intended to show her the full, overwhelming intensity that romance had to offer. He observed every detail of the girl's unique appearance, taking her in from head to toe. She possessed a natural air of authority, as if leadership were second nature to her. After she complied, she received praise, and they moved on to their next task, punishing the boy while acknowledging that his help would still be necessary. Tiba was left completely bewildered, unable to understand why he was being targeted when he hadn't done anything to deserve such treatment. Consumed by desperation, he questioned what he had done to deserve such a fate. She complained that he had abruptly ended the call without her permission. Kiba then steps in and attempts to explain the situation. This wasn't a concern for her, as she was confident she could enhance his appearance even further. The procedure was expected to be somewhat painful to endure. She now prepared to pierce right through him. He stood in disbelief as she instructed him to keep his tongue extended, leaving him uncertain of what was about to follow. In his desperate state, he was left wondering exactly how she intended to pierce his tongue. Needing a helping hand, she turned to Rina and asked her to open the package. Watching the instruments being sterilized, Kiba's fear intensifies as the reality of the situation finally sinks in. The needle she intended to use was of a truly massive scale. She ordered him to remain still, reminding him that he was nothing more than her puppet. Any act of defiance on his part is met with certain punishment. There was no reason for him to be afraid. He simply needed to let the situation take its course. He decided to feign being an infant, allowing others to take over the responsibility of caring for him. With a slow and deliberate motion, she began to pierce his tongue. She noted that the needle had nearly passed all the way through. At last, she succeeded in driving the needle through his tongue. Sheeper fought to suppress his tears while a sharp ache throbbed in his tongue. After losing a substantial amount of blood, she asked Rihanna to bring her a towel. Rita promptly handed over the item and asked if the boy would be all right, receiving Tamada's assurance that he was in no danger. She harbored no lethal intent toward him, nor did she mean him any actual harm. She made it explicitly clear that this would be the outcome every time he chose to defy her. Ultimately, any puppet that refuses to obey must be punished. The girl looming over him was unmistakably a demon. Once the tension finally broke, she pulled him into a gentle embrace, letting him rest in her lap. She praised his endurance through the pain, continuing to comfort him with the tenderness one might show a child. By this point, his sentence had already concluded. Throughout the ordeal, however, he managed to maintain excellent behavior. This earned him a gentle, appreciative pat on the head. She found the pair so incredibly endearing that she felt an irresistible urge to dote on them. For this reason, she longed for all the walls between them to finally disappear. She questioned whether they knew what people were most obsessed with. She is firmly convinced that this feeling represents love. Love has a way of pushing people toward irrationality and consuming obsession. This illustrates the profound impact love can have on the human heart. Eventually, they became truly irreplaceable to one another. They contemplated embarking on a rather unconventional plan together. Kiba was caught completely off guard by the unexpected proposal. However, she was well aware that this was exactly what he desired. They needed to prepare themselves to put their plan into action. Without hesitation, she began to undress right in front of him. Kiba refused the request, explaining that such an action would be unethical. They replied that the desire to feel significant was the exact reason behind their actions. Sharing a secret of this magnitude would naturally forge a unique bond between them. By then, the two of them had already become quite special to her. She too hoped to become someone truly significant to them. She suggested they establish a completely transparent love triangle. She questioned whether he felt any sense of comfort while she held him in her embrace. The act of hugging triggers a hormonal release that helps the body manage stress and anxiety. She also extended an invitation for Rina to join him. She seemingly went along with the proposal. All three of them realized they were now lying together on the same bed. Kiv's heart hammered in his chest, while Rina noted the distinct warmth of his skin as she touched him. They noted that sharing body heat directly would be a much more effective way to stay warm. The mere mention of it was enough to drive the boy to the brink of madness. Tamada questioned if he had ever witnessed people being intimate, all while wondering how the conversation had even reached that point. She wasn't interested in what he might have seen on the internet. She wanted to know if he had witnessed it firsthand in the real world. He had never witnessed it for himself, and he made a point to keep the subject out of his mind entirely. She was now genuinely eager to see it for herself. She proposed that they give it a shot right then and there. This would serve as the perfect secret for them to keep amongst themselves. She cautioned him that he was strictly forbidden from claiming they couldn't pull it off. If his feelings for her are genuine, he likely already harbors the desire to act on them. She urged him to meet her expectations, while Mina confidently chimed in to assert that she was also up to the task. The boy silently hoped she would wait just a moment longer. Before he had a chance to respond, his opponent had already closed the distance and pinned him down. He found himself questioning whether this was truly the right path to take. Before he could take another action, the impossible happened, stopping him in his tracks. A man reached out and pushed open the door to the apartment. Rihanna found herself looking at a complete stranger, unable to recognize who they were. Tomatig greeted him casually, acknowledging the man as her father. Infuriated, he sought an immediate explanation for the unfolding events. He pressed her for an explanation, but Tamada was more interested in learning how he had discovered their location. This left him conflicted, causing him to hesitate before giving her a reply. He explained that he had years of experience in location tracking. This was a choice that his daughter thoroughly disapproved of. Despite the circumstances, he still felt the need to clarify the unfolding situation. She questioned him with a provocative tone, asking for his perspective on the situation. A boy and a girl were shown lying side by side in the same bed. He was expected to grasp the situation with just a single glance. Growing uneasy, he told her that she wasn't allowed to go through with it. He then reached down and swept her up into his arms. Recognizing she wasn't yet married, she felt she had to maintain her boundaries and avoid crossing that line. He then questioned if this was the Kibo she had previously mentioned, and asked if the two were dating. She urged her father to settle down before she spoke, though he found himself stunned by her unwavering composure. Her only desire was to ensure the boy's happiness and maintain a sense of perfect normalcy, free from any trouble. Filled with concern, he asked if the boy had coerced her into doing it. Kiba stood his ground, asserting that he would never go through with such a thing. If his suspicions were incorrect, the young group would have a lot of explaining to do. However, they found that there wasn't much left for them to explain. Kiba was quick to respond, immediately informing them that it wasn't possible. He raised a hand to his head, deciding it was time to compose himself. He decided to set aside some time to speak with his daughter later on. Kiba was genuinely impressed to learn that this man was actually Tamada's father. His age came as a surprise, as he was far younger than anyone had anticipated. He then made his way toward Kiba. Remarking on the late hour, he offered to escort him back home. However, Tamada had his own thoughts to share regarding the situation. The boy had moved in and was now living with her in her home. Discovering the news in such a way left her father completely at a loss for words. With a smile, he asked his daughter to step aside so he could speak with Kaba privately. She likely permitted this to occur. The pair then set off on a short drive together. Out of every possible scenario, this one proved to be exceptionally complicated. Shortly after, the vehicle begins to pull away. The man eventually finished dressing Kebuk. He informed Kebuk that he would be asking several questions and advised him to consider his responses with great care. The outcome of the entire situation now hinges on the answers he provides. He warned that his self-control was reaching its breaking point. Overwhelmed by agitation, he pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the car to reckless speeds. He declared his willingness to crash the car into a pole, intending to end both of their lives. Keeper was then expected to speak candidly about the bond he shared with his daughter. For a stretch, the road ahead continued without a single turn. However, a sharp turn looms just ahead, right along the edge of a steep cliff. If the boy hoped to stay alive, he would need to provide a completely honest answer. Although no one had asked about their relationship, Kebus clarified that he and the man's daughter were not dating. Upon hearing this, he concluded that their connection was strictly physical. Kiba, however, remains firm and denies this point as well. Noticing the boy's brief hesitation, the man questioned whether the two had been intimate. The keeper insisted that they hadn't taken any action. However, they eventually admit that a kiss actually took place between them. Upon hearing those words, the man went completely still. He pressed for confirmation about the kiss once more, while a panicked Kidba begged him to focus on his driving. Overcome with rage, he declared his intention to kill the boy. Kibi clarified that although they shared a kiss, he wasn't the one who initiated it. Her father, however, dismissed these explanations as nothing more than mere excuses. Regardless, Kiva's explanation fails to serve as a valid excuse. Beyond that, she was the very person who had saved his life. Had she not intervened, he wouldn't have made it out alive. For this reason, he treats her with sincere respect, quietly hoping she will eventually learn to value herself just as much. He is convinced she possesses the strength to rescue anyone from even the most dire circumstances. Though she might seem unhinged, her ability to change everything is exactly what enables her to act the way she does. He is someone who truly desires to see her happy. Just as you finish, you let out a scream as the car hurtles toward the guardrail. Propelled by their extreme momentum, the car crashed straight through the barrier. During the descent, Kaiba felt his body become weightless, as if time around him had slowed to a crawl. He now found himself watching his own life unfold as a mere observer. The man had gone to great lengths, doing everything within his power to support the girl. He found himself reminiscing about the days of his youth. Despite his youth, he secured the role of the president's secretary, leading many to assume his position was a result of the president's personal favoritism. Word spread that during his time off, he served as a babysitter for the president's daughter. Cooper was delighted to meet Himander, who was still only a child at the time. Initially, she struck him as nothing more than an ordinary child. Aware that her father had entrusted him with her care, she apologized for taking up his personal time. She reassured him that there was no need for concern, as she intended to remain in her room. Despite her mature way of speaking, the girl remained remarkably polite. Attempting to be friendly, you mentioned that he would like to play with her. Smiling, she pointed out that the man was being dishonest. She assured him that there was no need for such formalities. He was caught off guard by her surprisingly mature behavior. After all, she was still just a child, so a little bit of selfishness was perfectly natural. That's how children are supposed to be. After hearing this, she suggests the victim play together. Without wasting a moment, she began playing a game of cards with him. However, the man remained concerned, as they had yet to make it out of the house. He stood by his earlier sentiment that children should be allowed to be a little selfish. She resolved to press on, intending to stop only if she were eventually caught. It wasn't long before he managed to locate the catcher. He remarked on her boundless energy, noting that such liveliness was perfectly normal for a child. While resting in his embrace, she asked if she had been childish enough. This development caused him to pause and reflect on the situation. It was clear that she stood apart from other children her age. The young woman expressed her apologies for calling him out on such short notice. Having developed genuine feelings for him, She was eager to find out if he would consider going out with her. Though he was genuinely pleased and valued her feelings, he ultimately decided to decline the invitation. The situation was complicated by the fact that the woman extending the invitation was already married. Through her tears, she admitted that her relationship was falling apart, hoping that since he was one of the few people who treated her with kindness, he would finally accept her. Ultimately, she knew that infidelity wasn't the answer, and that she needed to settle things with her husband. As she slowly regained her composure, she realized the advice she'd received was actually sound. She apologized, admitting that she had let her emotions get the better of her. He felt a wave of gratitude when she acknowledged the impossibility of the situation, knowing that since his childhood, he had never been able to refuse someone like her. She approached him once more, reiterating how despicable she found him. Despite the divorce filing, tensions remained high. As he tried to de-escalate the situation, a young woman reminded him she would only date him once the split was finalized. In reality, he had never actually uttered those words. Her weeping intensified as she admitted that his words were the primary reason she followed through with the divorce. Had he simply rejected her from the start, he wouldn't be trapped in this increasingly messy situation. Filled with concern over the potential risks, he finds himself unable to leave her side. There was a very real possibility that she would end up remaining single for the rest of her life. Once he recognizes his inability to distance himself from this person, he realizes this bond has become his greatest vulnerability. He understood this reality more deeply than anyone else. A man called out to him, questioning whether the claims were actually true. Someone needed to report the situation to the boss, and it was decided that he was the best person for the job. Between the busy workload and the budding romances among colleagues, a new complication begins to emerge at the office. Regardless of the severity of the accusations, the boss remained completely indifferent to the actual truth. His sole concern remains the productivity of his employees. He was curious to learn his colleague's name. He ventured outside, walking until the sound of a nearby conversation caught his attention. Realizing the key belonged to him, he learned that the woman involved in the crime had been dismissed from her position. Something significant must have occurred, as she wouldn't have been dismissed so abruptly otherwise. Despite her dramatic personality, she was no stranger to workplace affairs. Ultimately, she was proving to be more of a nuisance than a help. Ultimately, the president's choice was justified, as the accusations against him had been entirely fabricated. Whether her firing was a just punishment is up for debate, but it's reassuring to see the president taking his side. That favor has its limits, though, as the boss remains indifferent to his emotions and cares only about his output. Meanwhile, in another location, the child called out to him. Concerned for his safety, she checked to see if he was unharmed. Noticing his discouraged expression, she asked if something had happened. He realized that this young girl was the only person who truly cared for him, but the thought was interrupted before he could fully process it. He caught sight of a distinct mark on her arm. She confessed that she had been a difficult child, believing the blame rested entirely on her shoulders. However, he soon found himself growing increasingly concerned about Kubaro's well-being. They questioned her about how she had sustained the bruise on her arm. She explained that the incident occurred when her father, in a fit of rage, struck her with a shoe. While he struggled to understand the president's motives, the girl revealed that her recent test scores were the actual reason behind the decision. Her score of 0 was a shocking anomaly, especially given her history of high academic achievement. She intentionally chose to hand in a completely blank paper. Having never received a word of praise from her father, she spent her life desperately seeking his attention. Predictably, she ended up facing the punishment he had in store for her. From that point forward, the injuries she sustained only seemed to grow more frequent. Filled with concern, he asked if she had been struck again, and she confirmed that was the case. Once again, she submitted a completely blank sheet instead of providing an answer. However, an unexpected accident occurred while she was having dinner. She has come to believe that her father truly despises her. The young man admitted that he also held no love for his father. She expressed a heartfelt wish for him to be her true father. Touched by those words, he realized the current situation could no longer continue. He confronted the director, firmly stating that the mistreatment had to end. However, you had already intervened, asking him to stop harming the child. The director dismissed the bruises as the result of her playing by herself, claiming she simply had a tendency to act like a boy. He remained skeptical, but as patience wore thin, he was sternly ordered to return to his duties. Despite the young man's persistence, the president reminded him not to let personal matters interfere with the situation at hand. Their relationship was strictly professional, rooted in business rather than friendship. Simply talking to him wouldn't be enough to resolve the situation. This development might even further escalate his aggression toward the child. At this point, he found himself completely unsure of how to proceed. As he weighed his options, he searched for a way to resolve the situation. After receiving a cancer diagnosis, the president was admitted to the hospital. Despite the circumstances, the child showed great courage by remaining at his side. They were the only ones who came to visit him during his stay at the hospital. After years of recurring hospital stays, his health finally took a sharp turn for the worse. Ultimately, he passed away without his behavior toward her ever taking a turn for the worse. His final farewell was a solitary affair, proving to be just as lonely as his life. The two of them were now completely alone. Finding themselves alone that day, she took the opportunity to ask him a question. She then asked him if he would be willing to take on the role of her father. That one simple question would go on to alter the entire course of his life. She was the one who managed to pull his spirit back from the depths of despair. He found himself standing face to face with the young girl he had once failed to protect. She expressed her need for him to continue acting as her protector. It was in that moment that he finally arrived at a firm decision. He was determined to do everything within his reach to assist her. Once that choice was finalized, he officially stepped into the role of her new father. The girl was clearly delighted with her new god. She held on to the hope that their bond would continue to deepen. For this reason, he took it upon himself to ensure her safety. Slowly regaining consciousness, Kim realized he was now on the opposite side of the car. He found himself suspended precariously along the side of the cliff. As the car plummeted toward the earth, they realized they needed to get out before it hit the ground. He attempted to rouse the man, checking to see if he was all right. The man muttered a few incoherent words before falling silent. Kiba breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to find that he was still alive. He inquired if the man was capable of moving, and the man confirmed that he was. Feeling puzzled, the man questioned if the boy was truly trying to assist him, and Kaiba confirmed he was, explaining that he was helping simply because the man was Cooper's father. The girl would undoubtedly be outraged if he simply abandoned the man there. As the man begins to weep, Kaiba grows visibly concerned. He now viewed the boy in an entirely different light. The two are fundamentally different. Unlike him, the boy possesses the initiative to step up and help those in need. Believing the boy would be in good hands alongside Cooper, the man entrusted Kiba with his daughter's care. Kat felt a surge of confidence as the information confirmed her path forward. Even so, the prospect of them sharing a home together remained far too overwhelming for him to handle. Kiba gives his consent, and the man offers his thanks for the mutual understanding. Now the group must focus on making their way back to her location, once they've finally managed to resolve this predicament. With visible wounds marking their faces, it finally made its return. Clearly annoyed by the delay, the girl demanded to know what had kept them for so long. Furthermore, it was clear that they had taken quite a beating. The man approaches to discuss the prospect of them living together under the same roof. Akubaru cut him off, reassuring him that everything was all right. She then questioned him, asking if he was truly going to tell her she wasn't allowed to do that. She clearly has no tolerance for anything that dares to contradict her. Yenon reassures her that everything is fine, granting her his full approval. Kuba inquired if everything was truly all right. However, the man clarified that this was not the case. Valuing her above all else, he finds himself unable to ever turn her down. He began making his way toward Kiba. He understood that he couldn't afford to make any irreversible mistakes. He then inquired whether they truly understood one another. It seemed his chaotic life wasn't going to settle down anytime soon. Noticing their close proximity, the man asked Kayla to maintain some distance. Gazing out the window, the girl felt a deep sense of regret for making the same mistake once again. Regardless of her efforts, the outcome always seems to reach the same conclusion. She was overcome by a profound sense of relief and peace. With every life she takes, most people go to great lengths to keep their imperfections hidden from the world. The human form is remarkably easy to manipulate once life has left it. Abruptly, Isaida found he could no longer face her, vanishing from her life entirely. He pointed out that this woman was no different from the others. Slumped on the ground, she was overwhelmed by a deep desire for her life to end. As the boy approaches her, she takes a moment to ask if he's doing all right. He turned to her, asking if she would like something to drink. He invited her for a drink, and she agreed to join him. In another location, he took a moment to ask for her name. She introduced herself, stating that her name was Sasha Goa Hiro. She questions his motives for approaching her, and the boy explains that he only stepped in because she appeared to be lost. He revealed that he also once lived a life consumed by anxiety, spending every day hoping he wouldn't wake up. Fortunately, he eventually discovered a way to break free from his predicament. She was determined to uncover the truth behind what had just occurred. He explained that the entire matter was actually quite straightforward. He gradually began to accept the existence of a higher power. Ultimately, all that was truly necessary was a firm sense of belief. She found it impossible to place her faith in anything that lacked a tangible reality. The boy insisted she believe in her own salvation, just as he had been saved himself. Upon hearing his words, she responded with a question of her own. She expressed a deep desire for him to become her god. This would provide her with a reason to finally place her trust in him. Regardless of whether a god truly existed, her only hope was that someone would arrive to save her. He even contemplated whether he could make use of that individual. Struggling to find a response, he quickly excused himself to the restroom. As time passes without any sign of him, a waitress eventually approaches to announce they are taking the final orders of the night. Concluding the matter, she promptly requested the bill. She storms off in a rage after realizing he was a liar, prompting you to approach and explain that your only intention was to save her. Before she could even process it, he had already made his way inside the suitcase. She believed that people only showed their true colors in the moments right before they departed. In the moment she takes their lives, that brief instance belongs solely to her, becoming the most vivid memory in her consciousness. This is precisely why she finds it impossible to walk away from her current path. Despite her circumstances, she continues to hold out hope that salvation will one day find her. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her as morning arrived, just in time for her to catch the first bus of the day. She decided it was best to head home and get some rest. As she continued along her path, she bumped into a boy who was completely covered in bandages. This occurred simply because she wasn't paying attention to the path ahead. Without warning, she reached out and held the boy's face in both of her hands. Her persistent gaze began to make Kiba feel increasingly uneasy. This continued until she eventually spoke up to check if he was all right. Concerned by his bandages, she worried the creature might have reopened his wounds, but she felt a wave of relief upon learning he was actually fine. She then cautioned him to be more mindful of his actions moving forward. You stood there in silence, watching as she slowly walked away. He soon realized that she was a woman of considerable height. As she distanced herself, she began to reflect on the reality of her situation. As she held his face, the boy appeared visibly shaken. Mayu was fully aware of the reasons behind her actions. Observing what appeared to be a look of disgust on his face, she began to wonder if she was truly reading his emotions correctly. Struggling to accept the possibility, she found herself spiraling into a state of deep overanalysis. She grew concerned that her actions might have caused him to view her with suspicion. Unable to endure the situation any longer, she finally reached her breaking point. Determined to avoid any further confusion, she resolved to set the record straight immediately. They held a celebration to mark the official end of the school year. She inquired whether Keba would be available once the current events concluded. A sale happened to be taking place just a short distance away. Since she and Rio were headed elsewhere, she asked him to handle the sale on her behalf. Kibi placed her request firmly out of reach. Recognizing the uniform, the woman realized he was actually just a student. Once he agreed to the favor, Tamada expressed her gratitude with a happy smile. Although the kiss left him flustered and she promised they would meet again, the entire situation occasionally left him feeling frustrated. He simply couldn't bring himself to abandon her under these circumstances. With a clear objective in mind, he decided to pick up the pace. The discount was only valid until 6, and with it already being past 5, time was running short. As he attempted to flee, a hand suddenly reached out and seized him by the shirt. He recognized her as the woman he had bumped into earlier, and she was now curious to hear his thoughts on her. Upon seeing her face clearly, he finally realized who she was. Hamada had successfully tracked them down, appearing right behind them. She firmly instructed the woman to step back from Kiva. Intrigued by the comment, the woman asked if she was the one being referred to. She clarified that she never intended to frighten anyone. She simply intended to have a quick word with him. This development appeared to pique Tamada's interest. She asserted that the boy belonged to her, firmly telling the woman to let him go. With its business concluded, the entity began to make its exit. The girl addressed the woman with a cold air of indifference, acting as if she didn't care about her at all. This revelation prompted her to think more deeply about the situation. She pondered what kind of expression Tamada would wear if she found herself on the brink of death. Despite her urges, she was forced to hold back and maintain her composure. Although Kithel failed to secure the eggs, Tamada reassured him that it was fine since they at least managed to get some ice cream. The ice cream was presented in a variety of vibrant and eye-catching colors. Tomato was particularly fond of that flavor, which boasted a vibrant pink color. Surprisingly, it tasted just like rich melted chocolate. Judging by its appearance alone, the actual flavor was completely unexpected. She offered him a treat, but he turned it down, explaining that he didn't actually like chocolate. Despite knowing the truth, she vowed that she would never forget. A bit of the liquid ended up splashing onto her clothing. She finished her ice cream in a hurry, wanting to get her blouse washed as soon as possible. In the meantime, both he and Rio were instructed to stay on their best behavior. After they agreed to wait for the return, Tamada expressed his gratitude. She happened to be in the restroom at the time. She took a moment to wash her hands. Luckily, not a single stain remained. As she prepared to head back, she realized the tall woman was already positioned behind her. She instructed her to remain silent from that point forward. Had she allowed us to catch sight of him, she would have been killed on the spot. Waiting outside, her friends began to notice that she was taking much longer than anticipated. Sensing that something might be wrong, Kiba asked Rio to go and investigate the restroom. She agreed with him and promised to take a look for herself. She arrived at the restroom, only to find the place completely deserted. Tomato was nowhere to be found. Upon returning to Kibar, she reported that Tamada had mysteriously vanished. Despite her efforts, she was unable to find any trace of her. Inside the restroom, however, she stumbled upon an unexpected discovery. Lying on the floor was the very scar she usually wore. Growing increasingly anxious, she began to fear that Tamada might have been kidnapped. Riedel sank to the ground, his expression clouded with concern. Kibut made an effort to rouse her from her sleep. However, he was quickly countered by a powerful headbutt. In her place, her alternate personality, Reader, had finally awakened. Clearly frustrated, she insisted that they begin their search for the tomato immediately. She questioned if a tracker on her phone might help her recall some forgotten information. He had already completed the registration for her phone and headphones. This enabled them to monitor the device directly through his phone. They found themselves confined within a cramped and restricted area. She was currently being held captive in a serious hostage situation. Blindfolded, she questioned the woman about her motives. He dropped to the ground and desperately pleaded for her release. The kidnapper was caught off guard by just how composed her victim remained. She only finds a sense of peace once she becomes truly familiar with the people around her. The uncertainty of the situation left her feeling genuinely afraid. By gaining a deeper understanding of others, the fear they once inspired naturally begins to fade. She now insisted that the girl reveal her true identity. With a mocking smirk, she requested that the woman let her return home immediately. As her vision was obscured by the blindfold, she sensed that the woman had no real intention of taking her life. Once the blindfold was removed, she sensed that the woman's motives had shifted. The woman watched her closely, questioning what could be wrong with the girl. She found herself unable to decipher exactly what the girl was keeping hidden. She questioned whether there was truly nothing in this world that she feared. However, Tamala remains uncertain about what she should truly fear in this situation. The prospect of dying doesn't frighten her in the slightest. As it turns out, she was actually quite intrigued by the situation. She became deeply intrigued by the mystery of what truly happens after a person passes away. He contemplated whether he would face a void of emptiness, or if another life truly awaited him. The truth is something that only the dead can truly uncover. She views death as an inherent part of existence, allowing her to face it without fear. However, there was something she enjoyed even more, and she made sure to save that best part for the very end. Confident in her safety, she decided to present the woman with a proposal. She requested full authority over the woman's life. The specific rewards they can acquire depend entirely on their current location. Termata was likely nearby, situated somewhere in the immediate area. They steadily drew closer to the target location. They suspect she is currently hiding inside one of these apartments. An unusual sound echoed through the air, immediately putting them on edge. Kiba instructed the girl to find a hiding spot, promising to alert her if any danger arose. If she happens to hear him, she should immediately contact the police. Overcome with concern, she began to question whether he would truly be all right. After all, he could find himself in serious trouble if the kidnapper turned out to be a larger man or was carrying a weapon. After a frantic dash, he found his path abruptly blocked by a dead end. However, he knew he couldn't afford to let his concentration slip at such a critical moment. Since Tamada had already saved him once before, he felt a strong obligation to return the favor. The roles have reversed, and now it is finally his turn to come to her rescue. She struck the wall with such force that she ended up injuring her hand. She then cautioned the girl against speaking about matters she didn't fully understand. She realized that she would be unable to provide her with any meaningful help. The girl confidently asserted that no one knew for certain. At the very least, she might be able to grasp what was going through the woman's mind. Those words only served to heighten the woman's growing sense of unease. She had spent her entire life searching for someone who could truly understand her. The girl noted that the woman had clearly endured a lifetime of hardship. She remained completely misunderstood by everyone around her. She lived a life completely devoid of affection from those around her. People only ever drew close to her out of self-interest, discarding her the moment she was no longer useful. It was clear that every member of the group lacked any sense of accountability. Having faced a nearly identical ordeal herself, she could truly empathize with the struggle her companion was going through. Left without affection, she takes it upon herself to win the love of others, and since she lacks a father, she decides to create that connection for herself. This is precisely why she is prepared to take on the role of a god for her sake. If she intended to follow her, she would first have to untie those ropes. She eventually decided to step in and untie her personally. The girl promised to save her from despair. If she fails to act, she can instead press forward and deliver the final blow. She must understand that by choosing this path, salvation will remain forever out of her reach. He was told to open up and save them the trouble of breaking down the door. Upon stepping inside, he was immediately taken aback by the sight. The mysterious woman from before is now on her knees, pressing a kiss to Tamada's hand. Meeting his gaze, she expressed that her faith in him had never wavered. She remained confident that he would arrive to assist her. However, he was determined to understand the situation unfolding around him. Tamada reveals that the woman had managed to untie her own bindings. He found himself completely bewildered by the unfolding situation. Kiba then inquired about the child's identity. Tamada calmly explained that the person who had kidnapped her was the very same individual who eventually set her free. The woman admitted that she had abandoned her attempt to kill her. She now viewed her as nothing less than a god. Kiba was left entirely perplexed by the unexpected remark. She then announces that the time has finally arrived for the first divine revelation. Tamada urged the woman to finally put an end to her life of killing. Following her orders, Alma questioned whether the woman was truly prepared to carry such a burden. It was the only response she could offer with genuine pride. It was then she realized that they had yet to exchange names. After introducing herself as Tamada, she asked the woman for her name. She paused for a brief moment, seemingly caught in indecision. She took a brief moment before introducing herself as Sachi Goa Hiro. With the formal introductions complete, Tamada expressed his pleasure in finally meeting her. He caught sight of her smile. Kiba sensed a depth that went far beyond a child's simple innocence. Simultaneously, the situation appeared to be just as heartless. Meanwhile, the other girl outside was attempting to make her way inside. She was left wishing that someone would step in and clarify the entire situation. While at school, Tamada asked Kiba for his attention, wanting him to see her in her summer uniform. That familiar time of year had officially returned once more. She remarked that it must be quite a relief for him to finally have his arm free. The boy then inquired about what had transpired in the aftermath of Sachigala. Tamada mentions that the woman still reaches out to her periodically. Finding the answer suspiciously straightforward, he questioned if that was truly the extent of the explanation. Tamada explained that she had simply left the woman on her own. Kiba grew concerned after finding them all alone. He found himself puzzled by the fact that the woman was all alone. Yamato intended to save her, yet he struggled to understand the reasons behind her actions. To her, however, the answer was actually quite straightforward. True salvation is forged through the endurance of suffering. She would still have to endure significantly more hardship. Tumatik found herself unable to fulfill her aspirations of becoming a benevolent goddess. Just as Kiba had suspected, the girl was merely toying with her. He confronted her, warning that she was overstepping her bounds. As their conversation continued, a figure began to draw near. It turned out to be the same unpleasant individual he had encountered earlier. This is the individual who used to bully Kaiba. The man approached Kaiba, asking if she could spare a moment to talk. Tamada declined the offer, feeling that making the trip would likely be a pointless waste of time. The arrogant man dismissed the situation, claiming it wasn't a problem despite being a complete waste of time. He sought out Kiba, as there was a specific matter they needed to discuss. They made their exit, followed the entire way by Tamada's cold and threatening gaze. While on the rooftop, Kiba expressed that he had no desire to speak with him. As he drew closer, the man remarked that the boy continued to be a major source of irritation for him. He questioned whether Keval was the individual responsible for uploading the video. It was a clever tactic, leaving him to wonder if the transfer student was the one responsible for the idea. Despite the circumstances, Kema was curious to hear what he had to say. In a surprising turn of events, he arrived with the intention of offering an apology. This was a development Kiba had already anticipated. His anger finally boiled over, leading him to land a heavy punch squarely on the jerk's face. He was left completely baffled as to why this had even occurred. Kiba was incensed, feeling that he shouldn't have to apologize for something he hadn't done wrong. However, the arrogant man didn't seem to grasp the situation. He explained that his only intention was to strike up a friendship. All you ever truly wanted was for the two of them to become friends. Seething with anger, Kiba demanded to know if he had already forgotten the suffering he'd been forced to endure. It was for this reason that he had come to offer an apology. He realized that a simple apology wouldn't be enough to mend the situation. Before he could offer an explanation, he was struck once again. Growing increasingly annoyed, he questioned Kettle about how many more times he intended to strike him. Kiba struggled to process the unfolding events, feeling it was deeply unjust for the god to suddenly seek atonement. He found himself wishing the man would simply stay the unpleasant jerk he had always been. He realized that if he were to change, there would be no one left for them to hate. If the antagonist had known more about this individual, he would have concluded that Keb from Truve deserved every bit of the mistreatment. He confirmed that Keba was actually a genuine werewolf. He arrived to offer an apology, but he accepted that Kibbet might still choose to hold on to his resentment. He then asked Cable if he was opposed to the idea of the jerk finally relieving him of this heavy burden. It appeared that Kima was fully in favor of the proposal. Shelby extended an invitation for him to finally settle their dispute. Should his arrogant opponent win, Cabell would be forced to accept his apology. Should Keeble emerge victorious, he would have complete control over his opponent's fate. Keepus remarked that it was far too easy for him to speak such words. This meant you could finally face your opponents on equal footing. However, Kiba found himself unable to follow through with that plan. Without hesitation, he landed a sharp kick between the man's legs. Unconcerned with honor or rules, he had no reservations about using underhanded tactics to get the upper hand. Beyond that, he was absolutely terrified of the unpleasant individual. Despite the situation, they continued to land blow after blow against him. Eventually, the jerk managed to catch both of them in his grasp. He explained that he had been enduring a constant barrage of strikes since he started speaking, which had left him in considerable pain. Kiba's involvement was the deciding factor that ultimately tipped the scales. This was largely due to the fact that he had always viewed him with a sense of superiority. His only intention was to strike up a conversation with him. She finally recognized the deep uncertainty clouding his heart. The arrogant man grew increasingly frustrated with being constantly overlooked. Just as he was about to strike, Tamata suddenly intervened to pull them apart. At the peak of their youth, they felt that letting their fists speak for them was the ideal way to settle their differences. However, this wasn't the full story, as a vital element was still missing. She knew precisely what she was looking at. It was clearly missing a much-needed touch of affection. She walked up to the arrogant man and flirtatiously suggested they start a romance. He struggled to grasp the true meaning behind her suggestion. As she prepared to depart, she offered Kedavok a final farewell. She warned Keybutton not to flee, making it clear that they would settle their business upon her return. Stunned into silence, he could only watch helplessly as the two of them walked away. Following the incident, the school day resumed its regular routine. As the lessons continued, neither Tamata nor the jerk returned to the classroom. He was starting to feel a growing sense of irritation. Harry approached him to ask if he knew where Tamata could be found. By that point, she had already walked away with that unpleasant man. She recalled her earlier promise to bring love into existence. He was taken aback by several peculiar realizations that crossed his mind. He couldn't accept such a possibility, as the weight of that reality would be more than he could handle. His firm soon received a formal notification. He soon discovered that she had already returned home. He then bid Hera farewell before taking his leave. He rushed back home, eager to check on Tamata. Upon entering, she was greeted by him, who mentioned that the jerk had something to tell her. Kibble was caught off guard, as he hadn't anticipated hearing from him at all. His initial instinct was that the news wouldn't be good. Unfortunately, the man intended to document everything they had done. He approached K-Butter, intending to make a confession. He almost told him to keep his distance until he finally heard the man admit that he loved him. It was only after speaking with Tamata that he finally came to this realization. It makes one wonder where his true affections actually lie. Kiba found himself at a complete loss for words, unsure of how to even react. Tamada leaned in and quietly whispered a few words to him. She admitted that in a sense, she had effectively brainwashed him. She was well aware that Kiba had no desire to experience being bullied ever again. To prevent that outcome, she orchestrated a situation where the jerk would fall in love with him. The execution went even more seamlessly than she had initially anticipated. The circumstances were becoming truly beyond belief. When the man tried to pry into their conversation, Kiba bluntly told him to stay quiet. While clutching his hand, the arrogant man vowed to do his absolute best to win Kaiba's favor. Regrettably, the situation took a turn for the worse that even Kaiba failed to foresee. Temata approached him, mentioning that she had something to share. She wondered how the girls managed to settle the score. She offered an apology for the lack of advance notice. For the time being, he would be staying at Drick's residence. Among all the potential scenarios, this development is undoubtedly one of the most disastrous. Now they both find themselves staying at the exact same location. It was clear that our protagonist wasn't pleased with how things were unfolding. Tamada prepared for a girls' night, and at last the festivities were set to begin. The festivities were just getting started as she prepared for a lively sleepover with her group of friends. She proposed they begin with introductions, and Rio was the first to step forward. Without any preparation, the girl suddenly blurted out her name. Seeing her two friends finally strike up a conversation sent the spirited girl into a state of pure excitement. Beaming with a bright smile, Sachigawa introduced herself with complete sincerity. She couldn't hide the fact that she found the other girl truly impressive. After that endearing moment, the group finished their introductions and prepared for what was next. It's time to stock up on snacks for the long night ahead. Tamada quickly prepared a bowl of instant noodles along with a variety of snacks. After taking a seat on the couch, she broached the subject of romance, piquing the volleyball player's interest. She wondered about the reason for their girls' night, though she made it clear she was thrilled to be invited. Afterward, the eccentric girl voiced her specific request. He hoped to become better acquainted with her circle of friends. Meanwhile, the protagonist is struggling to keep his composure as he spirals into a complete panic. Sitting on the living room floor, he began to question the series of events that had led to this predicament. The kind-hearted boy shared some unfortunate news. There was only one bed in the house, so he considered telling a few jokes to lighten the mood. Ultimately, the protagonist chose to settle for the floor, as it was the only firm surface he would be encountering. Despite the boy's assurances that he would behave, the protagonist wasn't willing to take any chances. With the matter resolved, the kind-hearted boys offered their next suggestion. They started things off by sharing a quick meal of instant noodles. Finally, the protagonist expressed his gratitude to the kind boy for allowing him to stay at his home. The simple expression of gratitude seemed to leave the young man completely stunned. Overwhelmed by embarrassment, they quickly rushed off to prepare their noodles. This left the protagonist alone to grapple with the weight of his current circumstances. He found it hard to believe that the boisterous girl was having a night out with her friends, reflecting on how exciting it must be to enjoy one's youth so freely. Spending the night with a kind boy felt inherently awkward, especially since they were hardly even friends. At last, the kind-hearted boy returned, bringing the noodles with him. He also noted that a festival was scheduled to take place the following weekend. He suggested they travel together, but the protagonist promptly rejected the offer. Inwardly, he remained preoccupied as his thoughts kept drifting back toward the festival. He was eager to invite the spirited girl to join him, certain that her presence would perfectly complete the atmosphere. The following day, the protagonist attempted to send a message to the wild girl. Summoning his courage, he finally sent off the invitation for her to join him at the festival. To the protagonist's surprise, she accepted the invitation and expressed her genuine desire to go. Her immediate acceptance filled him with a surge of excitement as he moved forward. The only question remaining was whether the two of them would end up attending the festival alone. Knowing her reputation, he was certain she would return with a group of allies in tow. He made a point of reinforcing his desire for them to be alone. She gave her consent that evening, and while he celebrated the news, the young boy fell fast asleep in his bed. After much anticipation, the day of the festival finally arrived. Just on the other side of the door, the wild girl was busy getting ready for her outing. This sends the protagonist into a total panic, his nerves so frayed that time itself seems to grind to a halt. Tamada finally calls out, announcing that she is ready. She seeks his approval on her appearance, but our protagonist remains completely indifferent. Overwhelmed by the situation, our protagonist's mind raced, leaving him completely speechless. He finally managed to work up the courage to tell her how pretty she looked. The jujitsu uniform suited her remarkably well. She expressed her gratitude for the compliment, acknowledging that it was finally time to move forward. Since the festival is such a major attraction, the streets are teeming with people celebrating the occasion. Tamata was equally delighted, as she always found summer festivals to be a truly enjoyable experience. She soon discovered that a fireworks display was scheduled for later that evening. Realizing they would be spending quite some time together, she suggested they stop for a meal, specifically mentioning her love for grilled squid. She surged forward with sudden speed, leaving the protagonist far behind. He fell behind the others, unable to keep pace due to his own clumsy mistakes. He found it impossible to maneuver through the dense crowd. Reacting to this, the wild girl reached out and seized him by the arm. Noticing how packed the area was, he decided it was best to hold her hand to avoid getting separated. The pair is now weaving their way through the crowd. They navigated through the dense crowd, keeping their hands firmly locked together. Our protagonist is a complete wallflower who lacks even the most basic social skills. This was a significant moment for him, occurring while the girl remained focused on the path ahead. He poured out his emotions and finally confessed his love for her. Tamata responded by casting a casual glance back over his shoulder. The protagonist then expressed his desire to simply spend time with her during the upcoming festivals and any future outings they might share. He felt certain that she was the only person he could ever truly love. The poor guy is clearly naive, unaware that this is only the first of many challenges he's about to encounter. In his current vulnerable state, he confesses his deep love for her while feeling an intense tightness grip his chest. Predictably, the worst-case scenario finally unfolded. The girl offered a sincere apology. It was then revealed that she was nothing more than an empty shell. She simply couldn't reciprocate his feelings, as she felt no love for him in return. She was genuinely overwhelmed, struggling to navigate her own emotions and bridge the gap between herself and others. She was completely unfamiliar with the concept of how to love another person. However, none of this bothered our mild-mannered protagonist, as he accepted her wholeheartedly just the way she was. Encouraged by his sudden display of courage, she decided to see how he would react to her next move. She leaned in close to him, but anyone expecting a kiss was quickly proven wrong. She asked him to make a promise that he would eventually have to fulfill. He was destined to live a life where unhappiness would never find him again. If he could find happiness in this state, he would finally be capable of experiencing love. He was free to express his affection for her in whatever way he desired. Serious discussions took place before they officially decided to open up their relationship. The girl finally presented her full list of conditions, yet the man still failed to grasp the true weight of her demands. While he struggled to make sense of the situation, the night sky was suddenly illuminated by fireworks. While watching the performance, the spirited girl realized she had misread the time. They hurried along, aiming to reach a specific vantage point that offered an ideal view of the fireworks. However, as he accompanied her on their walk, in an unfortunate moment, her sandal suddenly snapped. Our protagonist, who bore a resemblance to a cow, inquired if she was doing okay. Fortunately, she escaped the fall without any major injuries, though she now found it difficult to walk properly. Gazing back toward the sky, she found herself wishing she could experience the fireworks from a much closer perspective. This surge of courage emboldened their bovine companion, who stood his ground. He effortlessly hoisted her up, carrying her off like a heavy bundle. With a singular goal in mind, he urged her not to worry and explained the reasoning behind his actions. He decided to put his newfound physical strength to use by carrying her directly to her destination. This display of power exhilarated the wild girl, making her feel like a princess being carried away. The remark left our protagonist feeling a bit self-conscious. Despite her obvious reluctance to be carried, he decided to ignore her protests and proceed anyway. The spirited girl couldn't help but notice that the little cow occasionally exuded a surprisingly masculine presence. The weight of those words had a significant impact on the beta's state of mind. After completely leveling the site, the group headed toward their destination, while the spirited girl asked the protagonist to ease up on his teasing. After ascending the long staircase, they finally reached the top. After a long journey, they finally reached their destination. Tamata expressed his gratitude to the protagonist, who was completely exhausted after the mission. He was so distracted that he even managed to forget about the fireworks display. These lights continued to illuminate the summer night sky, and now, finally able to appreciate the scenery, they took a moment to simply unwind. Tamata held on to the hope that they would be able to witness the same festival again next year. In that moment, the protagonist found himself wishing he could make time stand still. While spending time with the wild girl, he silently wished for a stroke of luck from the universe. This was all done so that his wish could finally become a reality. At last, he caught her by surprise, pulling her into an unexpected embrace. Our protagonist's primary goal is to settle down and lead a peaceful, quiet life with her. He hoped to linger in her embrace for just a few more moments. The following morning, an unexpected knock sounded at the door. There was a knock at his door, and he promptly went to answer it. The protagonist suddenly caught the sound of a girl's voice. Mistaking them for salespeople, he offered an apology and explained that he wasn't interested. He was caught off guard when she suddenly asked if he had truly been happy lately. As long as he finds happiness, Kubaru will be there to guide him forward. The situation takes a strange turn as the protagonist is seemingly recruited by a cult, though a quick correction is necessary before moving forward. Though he initially mistook the character for a girl, he soon realized it was actually a very slender and feminine young man. Our protagonist now seeks to uncover the true identity of this mysterious figure, Kubaru. A voice from the other side of the door spoke up, explaining that they realized that this individual was, in fact, their god. At this point, our protagonist was certain he had just encountered a truly eccentric individual. Tamata arrived as well, questioning why the protagonist had taken so long to answer the door. Meanwhile, the man on the opposite side stood waiting in the distance. He recognized Kubaru in an instant. She revealed her intention to sell the wild girl. She suddenly fell face first onto the ground after her legs gave out. A mysterious entity called out her name. The protagonist questioned the eccentric girl about her rise to cult leadership, but she adamantly claimed she never agreed to such a position. Pointing toward the eccentric boy, she remarked that the wild girl had actually managed to gain a following. Without hesitation, the rowdy girl mentioned that Mikoto had asked for permission to start a fan club. This revelation left our protagonist deeply shaken and noticeably uneasy. Mikoto stood his ground, firmly asserting that everything was legitimate. Ever since the wild girl saved her, she had stayed close by her side. Regardless of the situation, she remained completely devoted to the wild girl, who served as her only source of direction. Now, she has dedicated herself to a mission of sharing her faith with others. Confronted by the unruly girl, the protagonist found himself even more perplexed. Makoto still has several more secrets left to reveal. She has completely transformed the protagonist into a cube. Bane struggled to keep pace with the constant mayhem surrounding the unruly girl. This interaction left Makoto wondering about the true nature of their relationship. Visibly flustered, the protagonist maintained that they were still just friends. Makoto reacted intensely to the news, certain that fate had played a hand in bringing them together. She had already secured an invitation for both of them. He decided to head over and survey the castle she called home. Our protagonist was left completely at a loss for words. Just beside the wild girl, several bodies lay scattered across the ground. With the bodies completely bound, he found it impossible to tell if they were still alive. Alternatively, he might have just been remarkably bad at playing hide-and-seek. With tears welling in her eyes, Mikoto desperately pleaded for help. The wild girl stepped forward to save everyone. That was indeed exactly what she had requested. Their survival now depended entirely on the wild girl stepping in to save them. Confused by her words, our protagonist sought clarification on what she meant by saving him, but Tamata's immediate agreement only left him more bewildered. Feeling even more perplexed, he stepped in to provide an answer for her. She asserted that no one would find salvation. Tamata then questioned whether he felt any sympathy for those people. Makoto, however, finds himself in a completely different situation. Everything was now in place to commence the salvation ritual. He handed the wild girl a pair of scissors so she could begin cutting open the cocoons. Feeling increasingly uneasy, the protagonist checked to see if anyone else was present inside. Makoto then stepped in to confirm that the statement was indeed accurate. It turns out those are actually living people who have been transformed. They remained dormant within those cocoons for an entire month. He simply waited for the wild girl to take control of him. They had been waiting all this time for the cocoon to finally break open. Our protagonist wonders exactly how those fools have managed to stay alive. The second wild girl then remarked that the answer was shrouded in mystery. Their desperate desire for salvation was the only thing that had kept those fools alive for so long. Scissors in hand, the wild girl prepared to finally cut open the cocoons. Gradually, she began to make steady progress. She carried herself with an air of angelic sweetness. He swept in to rescue the unfortunate victims. Having finally broken free from their cocoons, the survivors turned to the wild girl, desperate for her leadership. Makoto was well aware that these fools were overstepping by asking far too many questions. They held back their questions to ensure they didn't become a nuisance to their savior. Just like the audience, our protagonist finds himself completely disoriented. However, the girls who had just emerged from their cocoons were now looking for someone to lead them. They decided to let the wild girl make all their decisions from that point forward as they hurried away. Fleeing for their lives, Makoto asked the wild girl to lead them. Tamada fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words after hearing the request. Our protagonist then addressed the group gathered before him. It's clear that these individuals are struggling with some deep-seated psychological issues. Without a moment's hesitation, he reached out and took her hands. He attempted to escape from that bizarre location. He reached the location only to find the door was locked. Makoto issued a firm command for them to return immediately. She is determined to prevent anyone from escaping that sacred ground. He noticed the door swing open unexpectedly. The girl desperately tried to prevent him from walking away. He discovered a clever way to slip away unnoticed. He immediately began scouring his surroundings for the closest exit. He eventually came across a flight of stairs. With their pursuers quickly closing the gap, their only remaining option was to head upward. Despite the impracticality of moving further from the exit, they rushed up the stairs to escape the encroaching horde. Finding a room, he rushed inside and quickly secured the door behind him. He left Makoto behind entirely. He stood outside, visibly seething with frustration. Sitting isolated on the floor, the protagonist found himself at a complete loss for what to do next. Ramada suggested they simply open the door, but our protagonist remained cautious. However, the protagonist wasn't on board with the idea, as it seemed even less appealing than just staying put. He was anxious that Tamada might eventually forget him, but she seemed to have a different perspective. However, she had previously given her word that such a thing would never occur. This is because our protagonist was the very first doll she ever owned. It was clear that he would always possess a quality that set him apart from the rest. Determined to see if he was truly exceptional, he decided to put his potential to the test. She clearly had enough dolls by now, as the situation was beginning to resemble a toxic relationship drama. Before she acquired other dolls, his only desire was for her to bring him happiness. Currently, he finds himself pleading for even the smallest bit of affection and attention. He didn't want Tamada to hold the same significance for anyone else that she did for him. She had reached the pinnacle of her dangerously captivating beauty. Tamada questioned whether the boy truly felt he needed her. Plagued by a complete lack of self-worth, he agreed to her request, knowing she was the only person he had left. A multitude of gods had already gathered outside. Once they were outside, the wild girl no longer needed to remain. He wouldn't be that person for anyone else, as that was the core of their connection. Those were the words our protagonist shared. He proposed that she leave the area with him. The situation outside was rapidly descending into chaos. A figure nearby could be seen swinging an axe. Makoto is determined not to hand the unstable girl over to anyone else. She was driven by an unwavering sense of resolve. Prepared to cut down anything in her way, she began relentlessly battering the door with her axe, putting all of her strength into the assault. The sudden commotion immediately drew the attention of everyone inside. Having noticed the glint, she declared that she wouldn't allow the unstable girl to escape their grasp. He returned to batter the door with heavy axe blows, leaving the protagonist completely terrified. Finally, he shouted at the crowd, asserting that Tamada belonged to no one. If she chose to save those unfortunate souls, it would lead to a major turning point. Ultimately, it was their own decision to perceive her as a deity. However, to our protagonist, she is something else entirely. He tried to convince the oblivious crowd that she was actually just an ordinary girl. Her eccentric personality often leads to some rather unpredictable behavior. Knowing her tendency to constantly end up in harm's way, he felt a strong need to keep a close eye on her. Additionally, she possessed a smile that was quite charming. Despite everything, she was still the girl he had feelings for. Once again, the protagonist urged the group to depart from the area. Makoto explained that any hope of escape was completely out of the question. They were currently positioned at the very top of the church tower. They even seemed to be contemplating a desperate leap from the window. It's clear that their end is now inevitable. A sudden, biting chill swept over the protagonists. He declared that on that day, he would finally strike down the god worshipped by these pagans. A heavy silence fell over the background characters as our protagonist stood before them. Our protagonist stood by the window, gazing out at the world outside. He proceeded with the unpredictable girl at his side. He stated that once this was over, the two of them would move forward together. Uncertain of who would survive, they finally took the leap. He leaped through the window as our main character made his escape. The protagonist hoped that the eccentric girl would decide to accompany him. Realistically, if they managed to survive a fall of this magnitude, he would be left in utter disbelief. He held on to the hope that she would agree to go out with him, even if it was just for a single date. Even as she plummeted through the air, the girl wore a devious smirk. By some stroke of incredible luck, they landed safely in a patch of bushes that cushioned their fall like pillows. Tamada announced that they had finally succeeded and asked if the two were now officially a couple. The unexpected question left our protagonist visibly stunned. The erratic girl insisted that he was the one who had actually made that statement. However, she appeared to be already second-guessing the words she had just spoken. In that moment, he spoke up and expressed his desire for the two of them to become a couple. Tamada then requested that he look after her from that moment forward. She sealed the moment by planting a kiss directly on the young man's lips. Having witnessed the entire scene unfold from the window, Makoto is now left to process what she just saw. He is now consumed by a deep and savage sense of envy. A group of onlookers gathered behind her, eager to learn what the next step would be. However, the girl simply remained silent. Looking back over her shoulder, she hesitated for a moment. She informed the side characters that their god had abandoned them, had ultimately met their end. They were finally released from the grip of that chaotic madness. Now everyone finally has the chance to be free. At last, they were finally clear of the surrounding turmoil. Meanwhile, the focus shifts to the events unfolding within the city. A girl with dark hair made her appearance. They stood witness to an incredible sight. Directly before her eyes, a figure was plummeting through the open air. The moment they finally made contact with the ground, the person's physical form lost its structure, transforming into a gelatinous mass. He departed, leaving behind everyone who had witnessed the scene. The sight left him completely shaken. As if the situation wasn't already difficult enough, things were about to get even worse. That body was merely the first, with many more soon to follow. Additional individuals were now seen plummeting from the sky above. He took a seat on this couch next to the unpredictable girl. The protagonist found it nearly impossible to process everything that was happening. He had actually started dating this spirited girl, and as they settled into their life as a couple, he felt as though he were living out a dream. Leaning back against her, he began listening to the news broadcast. Reports emerged that several people had fallen from that same building on that very day. The identities of every victim had finally been confirmed. Standing among them was Makoto, a girl known for her peculiar nature. He identified the names of the various background characters. Our protagonist begins to panic, finding himself completely overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation. The situation grew so intense that he inadvertently dropped his phone onto the floor. He remained unable to fully process how everything had reached this point. Tamada was also following the broadcast, keeping a close eye on the news. They paused to grieve for the life that had been lost. It appeared that the catalyst for everything that had transpired was... It all boiled down to one single factor. Tamata ultimately decided to stay by the protagonist's side. She promised him that they would do something truly exciting the following day. The two of them soon set off to enjoy their date together. Meanwhile, the young man was starting to spiral into a complete state of panic. Tamata asserts that they are officially a couple now, suggesting that this new status should be enough to settle the matter. This is set to be a chaotic experience, especially given her unpredictable nature. The group was craving pancakes, but they soon found themselves preoccupied with other matters. The protagonist remains visibly on edge, unable to shake his persistent anxiety. Tamada suggests they start wearing matching outfits, including all their accessories. The situation held the potential to be incredibly exciting. However, the protagonist remained completely bewildered by the situation. He dismissively brushed the wild girl's hand away. Her complete lack of empathy was profoundly unsettling. Despite the lives lost that day, she remained completely unfazed. Tamada now finds himself wondering how he should handle a situation like this. She was equally clueless, having no real understanding of the situation herself. Grieving over the situation wouldn't change the events that had already unfolded. Regardless of the circumstances, it was clear that those people were never coming back. It was evident that the wild girl had already made her final decision. She's clearly interested in him, so he really has no reason to feel discouraged. After all, this was the exact outcome he had been striving for all along. She questioned him once more, asking if this outcome wasn't exactly what he had wished for. However, the young man had completely misread the situation. He was determined to prevent those people from losing their lives. He insisted he never wanted this, but Tamada claimed it was exactly what he desired. He was driven by a possessive desire to keep her all to himself. That was the inevitable price for harboring those emotions. Our protagonist recalls a specific detail from their very first encounter. He remarked on how fragile and utterly useless a crow's body truly was. Tamada has a faint recollection of that moment as he begins to piece everything together. He found himself wondering about the reasoning behind her sudden remark. She dismissed him as worthless, claiming his inability to move was simply too boring. This sudden revelation catches him completely off guard. He questioned whether she shared his perspective on humanity. Predictably, she accepted without hesitation. At last, he was beginning to gain a clearer understanding of the small psycho's behavior. This presents a challenge for anyone who idolizes her or finds themselves becoming too attached. Tamata has become an essential figure who simply cannot be replaced. She possessed the power to turn anyone into her personal doll. It was then he realized that he was nothing more than another doll in her collection. If someone more impressive than him were to appear, if it rolls over him, he's finished. He had hoped for a sudden moment of clarity, but in reality, he was completely unwilling to be replaced. He couldn't help but imagine the wild girl discarding him the moment someone more intriguing caught her attention. He wasn't about to let things stand as they were. Once more, he pulled Tamata into an embrace. This development left her feeling deeply perplexed. She was now ready to reveal the information she had been holding back. She caught him completely off guard by suddenly confessing her love. The impact of those words left him completely reeling. Regardless of the circumstances, he is determined to have that girl. He intended to keep the girl entirely to himself. He was determined not to be abandoned or left trailing behind the others. Driven by his own desires, he was determined to keep her by his side for eternity. With his objective clear, he now understood exactly what he needed to do. Our protagonist found himself overwhelmed by a complex mix of emotions. The atmosphere grew heavy with emotion following that intense confession. He intended to take complete command of the situation. He took a moment to process the gravity of the situation. However, the situation soon took an unexpected turn. Determined to avoid being ignored, he decided to take the initiative. He realized it was time for him to take the lead in their relationship. He began spending time with the spirited and uninhibited girl. As the sun rose the following day, as the weather grew warmer, he suggested they head to the beach for some time alone together. The strategy appeared to be a complete success. Tamata was filled with excitement as he looked forward to visiting the beach that day. The beach was quiet that day, as it was currently outside of the peak season. During this season, the atmosphere of the area is incredibly peaceful. It felt as though they were the only two people remaining in the entire world. He began to consider how he would handle himself in a scenario like this. Tamata suggests that he take a moment to rest. He stepped a bit closer to the water's edge to dip his toes in. He orchestrated all of this with the single goal of seizing absolute control. He observed the spirited girl as she splashed her feet in the cold water. To truly understand her, he would first have to lose his life. He felt a growing desire to delve deeper into her world. She expressed a strong desire to go on many more outings with her in the future. He admitted his desire to learn everything there was to know about her. He learned every detail about her, from her favorite foods to her unique personal quirks. Tamata readily agrees, promising to teach him every detail about herself. Without warning, they suddenly appeared. Suddenly, they were caught in the middle of a torrential downpour. Tamata was visibly energized by the arrival of the rain. However, the young man seemed entirely unfazed by the situation. This was hardly the time for a smile. He suggested they seek out some shelter and rest beneath a nearby cabin. One way or another, they managed to find a way inside the house. She was frustrated to find herself caught in the rain, as her weather app had failed to provide any warning. Our protagonist found himself completely soaked to the bone. His gaze is now fixed intently on a single spot. I intended to catch him by surprise once again. Without warning, she caught him off guard by suddenly wrapping her arms around him. She was merely trying to find a way to stave off the cold. The atmosphere was electric as he became visibly energized, his heart racing with a sudden surge of excitement. These realizations proved to be far too much for him, leaving his mind in a state of complete disarray. By the time he fully grasped the situation, events were already well underway. Before he could react, the spirited girl used all her strength to pull him down right on top of her. The two remained locked in a deep, unwavering gaze. She asked him once more to promise he would never be sad again, as she was certain they would find true happiness together. Back at school, he found himself overwhelmed by the lingering memories of that day. Gradually, a mounting sense of anxiety begins to take hold. An unsettling sensation began to creep into his chest. As he stepped into the classroom, he felt as though every eye in the room was fixed on him. Everyone was intensely curious to uncover the truth about his situation. The background characters have already spread the news, confirming that he is now officially in a relationship. The kind-hearted young man desperately tried to convince himself that the entire situation was just an elaborate prank. To his surprise, he was met with total silence and completely carried out by our protagonist. Tamada apologized and left to update her crew, leaving him feeling slightly more at ease. The gentle boy was on the brink of tears, having pinned his hopes on the upcoming cultural festival to finally make his move. Shortly after, a classmate reminded the group that the festival was fast approaching. Additionally, their school features a unique, specialized department. The sports and cultural festivals are set to take place on separate days, with classes competing head-to-head under their assigned team colors. Scoring is determined by a combination of their athletic performance and cultural contributions. The class that secures the most points will ultimately claim the crown, though Tamada found it surprising that the two events were scheduled so closely together. Her classmate was visibly stunned as they spoke about the student council president. The preparations were nearly complete, and the main event was just about to begin. This unexpected turn of events caught the wild girl completely by surprise. While he was occupied with his companion, these decisions were being finalized in his absence. The extra spoke up, inquiring about what they were doing. It turns out the two were actually on a date, cementing their status as quite the pair of troublemakers. Shortly after, the teacher stepped into the classroom. He announced that it was time for them to focus on their studies. This prompted a sudden rush as everyone scrambled back to their seats. Neros is the individual responsible for overseeing the upcoming cultural festival. He was driven by a desire to assist his entire class. While he's talking, the girls are clearly swooning over him. Naruse reached out to the group, asking if anyone had any ideas they wanted to pitch. A variety of ideas were proposed, with the group divided between setting up a haunted house or performing a play. He looked around to see what everyone was after. Ultimately, the group decided to put on a stage play. Ultimately, Snow White was the one they all decided on. The wild girl found the entire experience to be quite entertaining. His mind began to race as he struggled to process the situation. He envisioned her as Snow White, a role he felt suited her perfectly. Tamada questioned whether he had ever experienced anything like this during his time in school. In reality, he had never found himself in a situation quite like this before. Having not performed since her preschool years, she was incredibly enthusiastic about the opportunity to take the stage again. She proposed that they both sign up to volunteer as actors. There is a possibility that they won't be able to select their own roles. Nevertheless, she assured him that the experience would still be quite exciting. Naruse addressed the class, inquiring if anyone was interested in signing up for the audition. A single hand immediately shot into the air. One of the kids nominated the wild girl to play the role of Snow White. Given her stunning appearance, she was the ideal candidate for the role. Tamada found himself completely blindsided by the suggestion. However, a group of her classmates soon appeared. Everyone appeared to be fully supportive of her taking the role of Snow White. Flustered by the overwhelming support from the group, Tamada suggested they settle the matter by drawing lots. Naruse explained that the role was already hers, as long as she was willing to accept it. Ultimately, the wild girl decided to accept the arrangement. She was met with the enthusiastic cheers and excitement of all her classmates. With Snow White finally settled into her new surroundings, the time had come to determine who would be chosen as the next prince. Neros boldly declared his name. He was given a name and the signature hat required for his new role. This turn of events left the protagonist feeling deeply insecure. He quickly clarified that he was only joking, noting that they would also need to draw lots for this role. Ultimately, only one of them will emerge victorious. This would ensure that the situation remained fair for everyone involved. One by one, the candidates began to step forward. Despite his doubts about his acting abilities, he was determined not to let anyone else claim the role of the prince. As his turn finally arrived, he could only hold out hope for a miracle. However, the specific role he managed to pull from the selection was quite unusual. Everything inside the box was completely blank. When Narusa's turn arrived, he was the one who ended up being drawn. He was depicted in the likeness of the prince. For him, this development represented the absolute worst-case scenario. He entered the room, naturally attracting the attention of every woman there. With their respective roles now clearly established, Naruse approached the wild girl, intending to introduce himself. With the script finalized, he planned to meet her after class for a rehearsal session. He remained committed to the goal of teaching her how to conduct herself. While Tamada was filled with excitement, the protagonist found himself sinking deeper into a state of discouragement. Another young man began making his move. attempting to get closer to the girl he liked. The entire situation felt incredibly unsettling. Following those events, the beta's brain will begin to undergo a significant transformation. He found himself plagued by a deep sense of insecurity. He got the impression that the tomato was simply enjoying the atmosphere. They seemed to be getting along far too well with that man. This turn of events left our protagonist under an immense amount of pressure. He has no idea what the consequences might be if they continue to grow this close. The mere thought of it is enough to make him feel uneasy. The entire situation became incredibly uncomfortable. This time, however, he decided to place his trust in the girl. Regardless, he spent the rest of the day dwelling on the situation. He found it impossible to rid himself of this persistent situation. He struggled to push the heavy thought from his mind. He made his way through the hallways at a leisurely pace. He overheard Neros engaged in a conversation with several others. He behaved as if he'd won the lottery, clearly thrilled at the chance to perform alongside such a stunning girl. This turn of events left our protagonist feeling deeply insecure. Naruse declared his willingness to do whatever was necessary, as the final outcome was his only priority. The play itself meant nothing to him, serving only as a convenient excuse to get closer to her. Several classmates mentioned that she was already in a relationship. However, this man remains entirely indifferent to the protagonist's lowly status. He remained determined to make his move on the wild girl, regardless of the circumstances. Now that he finally understands the reality of his situation, he feels deeply discouraged. His standing as a beta is suddenly placed in jeopardy. He became convinced that a more capable rival was on the verge of winning her over. Filled with desperation, he was determined to prevent that outcome. However, he remained completely unsure of how to proceed. Suddenly, a new plan began to take shape in his mind. The situation may actually be far simpler than it first appeared. The other man simply needed to be removed from the equation. It was as straightforward as that. Keeping that thought in mind, our protagonist pressed onward. With everything in place, the protagonist was finally prepared to set his plan in motion. He is certain that Naruse intends to use the school play as a chance to win over the most beautiful girl in class, completely ignoring the fact that she is already in a relationship. At that moment, the protagonist resolved that he wouldn't allow anyone to lay a hand on his treasure. He is prepared to eliminate anyone who dares to stand in his path. He was already visualizing himself tightening his grasp. He focused every ounce of his strength on the extra, only to find himself waking up back in his own room. In the end, it was revealed that everything had been nothing more than a dream. Shortly after, he found himself being greeted by the wild girl. Sensed that something about him was out of place. Our protagonist simply dismissed her worries, choosing to remain silent instead. Only a single month remained before the cultural festival was set to begin. He approached Neros to see if he was available for a brief conversation. He sought to clarify several persistent doubts that remained. He suggests that they should find an understudy to serve as a backup for the performance. To put it simply, he had never once fallen ill before a performance. Upon hearing those words, the protagonist offered him his best wishes. He's definitely going to need it for what lies ahead. With the substitute out of the picture, the situation became much simpler, since he only had to contend with a single opponent. He approached one of the extras to discuss the costumes for the upcoming play. The girl noted that everything was proceeding exactly as she had intended. With the protagonist lending a hand, the entire task was completed well ahead of schedule. Now, the final step is for her to have the actors try on the finished outfits. Unfortunately, she finds herself unable to communicate with Naruse. Her emotions often become difficult to manage whenever he is near. Our protagonist stepped in and offered to handle the delivery on her behalf. This would prove to be an incredibly useful advantage for him. Once the costumes were in his possession, he confidently assured them that everything would go smoothly. She sensed that something was slightly unusual about his behavior. His behavior had undergone a noticeable shift, appearing far from his usual self. At last, he succeeded in tracking down the actor from the play. Naruse was the only one who found their meeting on the school terrace to be out of the ordinary. He had plenty of other opportunities to hand over the costume in a different location. The protagonist suddenly shoved his rival back. Whether he fell from the school roof or tumbled down the stairs is unclear, but the impact was significant. However, the young man remained completely unconscious. This was a promising sign for our protagonist. The clothes fit him perfectly, highlighting the fact that this world was populated entirely by eccentric individuals. They continued to put on a convincing act of innocence. Our protagonist reached out to his instructors, seeking their assistance. They were informed that Naruse had fallen down the stairs and suffered a severe blow to his head. Daily life at the school continued in its usual steady rhythm. Several girls expressed their concern for the unfortunate young man. Our protagonist remains confident that everything is under control. With their classmate now in the hospital, the group had to stay focused on the production and find a replacement actor. The kind-hearted youth stepped forward to take on the responsibility. However, our protagonist stepped in and urged him to remain calm. He carried out the action with a fierce and unwavering intensity. Our protagonist believed they should choose someone who was a more natural fit for the costume. It was clear that the object was far too massive for the gentle boy to handle. The costume maker noted that the protagonist's proportions were ideal, making him a perfect fit for the attire. Tamada then proposed the idea that, as it turns out, our protagonist is actually the rightful prince. He gave his word, vowing to dedicate every ounce of his effort to that goal. Huddled with his team, he was determined to ensure that all their hard work wouldn't go to waste. They were determined to ensure their performance was a complete success. Everyone continued to work hard, staying focused on their preparations for the upcoming cultural festival. This particular phase of the performance, Tamata was visibly energized as he processed the latest turn of events. At the moment, everything seemed to be progressing quite seamlessly. She checked to see if the protagonist wanted to rehearse his lines one more time. However, he just wasn't in the right frame of mind at that particular moment. Tamada continued his performance, acting out the scene where Snow White bites the apple and meets her demise. The situation left the young man completely at a loss for words. He stepped forward, spitting out the blood as he approached. He proceeded to read the prince's lines aloud. A figure as pale as snow lay there, completely motionless. Without warning, Tamada's eyes snapped open. They questioned whether the protagonist was the one responsible for the incident. She posed her question with a gaze so intense it could melt through any icy exterior. Attempting to stay composed, the girl insisted that he was already fully aware of the situation. Sensing his hesitation, she began to feel a glimmer of hope. She held on to the hope that her theory would prove to be incorrect. She reminded him of his role as the story's prince, noting that he shouldn't be the one handing a poisoned apple to the princess. However, the protagonist was completely lost, certain that the prince would never act in such a way. Tamada suggested that everyone has the power to write their own narrative. Despite the pressure, the protagonist stood his ground, repeatedly claiming he had no idea what she was referring to. Drawing near once again, Tamada spoke the only words that truly mattered. Ultimately, it was clear that he felt truly happy. It was now time for them to make the most of the cultural festival. Plans for this were already being set in motion at the school. Our protagonist was visibly thrilled by the situation. Several familiar faces could also be spotted among the crowd. He was filled with anticipation at the prospect of seeing them again. Recalling the events from earlier, the young man checked in to see if the protagonist was doing better. He reassured them that the situation had finally settled down. That was when Tamata arrived to offer a greeting. This left the volleyball player feeling thoroughly energized. Having missed her friend dearly, she pulled the girl into a warm embrace. This left the other man feeling quite bewildered. It was only at that moment he realized just how close the two of them truly were. Despite this, he took it upon himself to intervene, remarking that the two were becoming far too intimate. During their conversation, the volleyball player urged her father to ease up on the matter. Our protagonist was simply soaking in the atmosphere of his very first festival. It looked as though the situation was shaping up to be an incredibly exciting experience. He noticed that the conversation was starting to become a bit too intense. Our protagonist suggested that the group take a moment to rest. After tracking down some snacks, the wild girl was clearly overjoyed. To start their dessert feast, they first enjoyed some caramelized strawberries. One of their friends unexpectedly appeared. She questioned Tamada to see if he had committed all of her lines to memory. Additionally, she was concerned that her friend might be becoming overwhelmed by anxiety. However, Tamada stepped in to reassure her that everything was under control. In reality, it was our protagonist who was feeling the most anxious. During the festival, their friend did his best to talk him up and boost his confidence. He explained that he had brought a camera along specifically to capture the boy's talents on film. This only served to intensify the mounting pressure he was already facing. Suddenly, an unexpected figure appeared before them. It had been quite some time since he last crossed paths with the protagonist. By all appearances, he seemed to be faring quite well. With a suspicious tone, he inquired about the boy's condition, noting his pale and visibly shaken expression. Considering the events that had transpired, he knew he wasn't in a position to judge anyone. Ever since our protagonist reached his limit and attempted to take his own life, he shoved him, sending him tumbling down the flight of stairs. Tamada grew curious about what the two were discussing. However, the young man feigned ignorance, claiming he had no idea what the man was talking about. This turn of events left Naruse completely infuriated. It quickly became apparent that the young man was acting completely oblivious. Once again, he leveled an accusation against him, claiming he was the one who pushed him down the stairs. By legal standards, such an act is classified as attempted homicide. Naruse grabbed the young man by the shoulders and shook him, attempting to force a confession out of him. The only thing visible was a peculiar smile spreading across our protagonist's face. He suggested they both take a moment to calm down and talk things through.